Chapter 175. On this day in August, fear and uneasiness lingered on the entire retreating fleet. The news that the nobles' warships had been attacked by the Bloodsail pirates had been spread to the entire fleet through the Griffin Knights. Kurtiras, Commodore Cook, who was experienced in naval battles, had originally decided to let the entire fleet return. However, the messenger sent by Lothar insisted that Anduin and Duque could deal with the enemy's fleet, and that the Murlocs led by Naga had already rushed over. After some hesitation, Cook decided to maintain 3/4 of the sail and deliberately split the fleet into two. The fleet of Kurtiras, which had a certain amount of combat power, would lead the way, while the transport ships at the back would still have a chance to escape if they saw that something was wrong. 3 hours later, a large number of Bloodsail pirates appeared on the horizon. The strange scarlet almost made the lookouts subconsciously ring the alarm bells. In fact, a young lookout really did so. However, Kurtiras, who had foreseen the danger, arranged for double the number of lookouts, and another more experienced lookout stopped the young man. "Wait, look at the flag on it." After seeing it clearly, all the lookouts were dumbfounded. "Captain, I suggest that you come and see this." Yes, it was indeed the warships of the Bloodsail pirates. The navy of Kurtiras, who were of the same lineage, would recognize those ships even if they were reduced to ashes. In order to maintain the flexibility of the ship in all winds, it had a single horizontal sail and 3 triangular sails. The ship's sides were specially raised for boarding battles, and a removable wooden outer deck was installed for cannonade battles. Everything was clearly telling the navy of Kurtiras that this was indeed an old adversary. However, the golden lion flag of Stormwind hanging on the main mast was telling the world that this was already the property of Stormwind. The eyes of the navy of Kurtiras were burning with passion. Before becoming the Bloodsail pirates, the leader of the Bloodsail pirates, Duke Fairville, had spent a lot of money to build the best warships in the whole of Kurtiras. In terms of quality alone, it was even above the main fleet of Admiral Dalen Proudmoore. The only difference was that the total number of ships that Duke Fairville had taken away was relatively small. There were only 12 large merchant ships and 24 warships. After modification and upgrading, these 36 ships were definitely the main force of the Bloodsail pirates. Now that a total of 12 battleships had been taken away by the Stormwind, it would be strange if the people of Kurtiras were not envious. If they didn't know that Stormwind Kingdom was about to fall, they would have suspected that Stormwind Kingdom was going to threaten their position as the overlord of the sea. Not only that, but the standard of the newly built small warships was also quite good. In addition to the ships that the nobles had taken away, what appeared in front of the people of Kurtiras was a huge fleet composed of 70 warships of various sizes. If it weren't for the fact that they could see through the binoculars that the Naga and the Murlocs were escorting the Bloodsail pirates to do their work, the people of Kurtiras might have gone mad with jealousy. Brigadier General Cook put down his binoculars and muttered to himself, "Damn it, if we didn't have a stronger green skin to deal with, I would definitely suggest the General suppress Stormwind when I get back." On Poseidon, Van Cleef leaned against the porthole and stared at the strange fleet that was sailing in the opposite direction from the south of the fleet. The distance between the two sides was so close that he could even see the despair and dejection on the faces of the nobles' private soldiers. That was definitely not the expression of joy after surviving a disaster. If he had to use a word to describe them, it would be stray dogs. Excited blood pumped out of Van Cleef's heart and ignited his entire body. He felt his body and soul burning. The nobles are finished. Those arrogant nobles are finished. This voice was so clear and real that Van Cleef almost couldn't control himself. No matter how Duque did it, when the rotten flesh was cut off, even if Stormwind City fell, Stormwind would usher in a new life. Unknowingly, Edwin Van Cleef's heart was filled with the light of Duque. It was a fanaticism that made him offer everything of himself, including his loyalty, his life, his soul, and even his most beloved daughter, Vanessa. Late at night, Van Cleef couldn't calm down for a long time. Of course, he wasn't the only one who couldn't calm down. King Lang read the report 3 times, but after reading it he was still stunned for a full minute and couldn't speak. This report was too shocking. It wasn't just him, all the high-ranking nobles in Stormwind City were silent. Among the evacuated nobles, 1/10 of them were demons. When the Bloodsail pirates launched their attack, the demons who revealed their true forms caused the largest death of nobles since the founding of Stormwind. Of the 387 titled nobles, only 32 survived, and all of them were injured. 7 families were forever exterminated, and the remaining 13 families were also sparsely populated. Half of the surviving nobles were minors. Most of them were seriously frightened. This wasn't a fabricated report by someone or some force. The testimony of more than 800 survivors was almost unanimous. These survivors included several extremely devout priests. It wasn't just them, the testimony of the Bloodsail pirates' prisoners was similar. Lang closed his eyes in pain. Do I have to tell the people that the lords they trust as leaders, the nobles of Stormwind who inherited Thoradin the Great, 1/10 of them are demons? Lang's voice wasn't loud, but it clearly spread to every corner of the meeting hall. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. If they did that, it would be a huge blow to their morale. At this time, Count Carton, who used to be an ally of the Brando family, raised his hand and asked to speak. Why can't we think on the bright side? At least we got twice the number of ships. We have enough fishermen to act as sailors. We can evacuate the people twice as fast. Lang shuddered, and suddenly felt a little warmth in his chest. Yes, the people's losses would be reduced. But Earl Cairton spoke again. The people who died were all local lords. I think we should respect their opinions before announcing the results to the public. After all, they are the cornerstone of the kingdom. The Count's words were like music to their ears. Most of the nobles had evacuated this time, but not every one of them could do so. For example, the nobles with important military positions in the kingdom. How could their own children become demons and kill their own people? How could they announce such a shameful thing? In fact, they had already thought of a reason, but they just didn't dare to say it. Now that Count Carton gave them a way out, they were so happy that they wanted to run up and kiss the Count on the spot. Oh, they really had to rely on their own people at the critical moment. Chapter 176. They did not know who was the instigator of this incident. Revenge and whatnot could wait. The most important thing right now was to disassociate themselves from this disgrace. As long as their reputation was restored, so what if they died? At most, it would just be a redistribution of benefits. If their reputation was preserved, even if the ship named Lang Rin sank, they would have an excuse to seek refuge with the other human kingdoms in the north. After a short discussion, Marquis Daminan braced himself and stepped forward. He bowed to Lang and said, "With your Majesty's permission, we hope to announce it as follows. In order to cover the retreat of the people, the noble army led by Duke Ferens fought against the Bloodsail pirates. When they gained the upper hand, the nobles who had been secretly turned into demons by the Bloodsail pirates suddenly counterattacked, causing the fleet to be routed. At this time, the brave and fearless Sir Lothar and Earl Marcus arrived on their griffins and cooperated with the remnants of the noble army to annihilate the Bloodsail pirates' Zank fleet. Despicable! Shameless! At this moment, Lothar's lungs almost exploded with anger. It was clearly you bunch of nobles who despicably robbed the warships of the Stormwind Navy. In order to transport away the dirty wealth filled with the blood and sweat of the people, you unexpectedly suffered a double attack from the pirates and demons. Yet you still don't forget to flatter yourself at this time? If not for Lang holding him down, he would have already exploded after receiving the news of the warships being seized. Lothar's hair stood on end. In the next second, he was about to draw his sword and behead this shameless man. But at this moment, Count Daminan was suddenly slapped away. Count Carton's slightly plump body spun twice in the air before falling heavily to the ground. Shameless! A thunderous roar shook the meeting hall. Not many nobles looked at the person who slapped Count Carton. He was the new generation of nobles, the most popular figure recently, Duke Marcus. This young duke had a more unyielding aura than Lothar. Duke abruptly waved his hand and pointed at Count Daminan, whose face was now swollen. While commoners risk their lives to dig moats for a ship ticket, you nobles throw a naval officer in a stormwind into the dock for a chest of gold. Lothar's eyebrows twitched. When 100,000 soldiers and civilians were prepared to risk their lives to bring up the rear, you guys didn't even care about how the warship would return just to take away a beautiful maid. You guys even blew away the last soldier on the warship. Lord Bolvar Fordragon's cheeks burned. It's obviously the filthy wealth of you nobles that attracted the pirates. It's obvious that it's your own corrupted souls that brought about the depravity of the pirates. You have the cheek to claim that you're the heroes who fought against the pirates? Claiming to be the descendant of Thoradin the Great? But I don't want to be associated with you. With that, Duque spat on Marquis Damonen's face. It was obvious that Duque had insulted Marquis Damonen. Every noble present felt that the spit was on their faces. King Lang trembled from head to toe. At this moment, Len was frantically asking himself, "Am I wrong? Was I really wrong?" Ever since he was young, the former king had always taught him that the nobles were the cornerstone of the kingdom, and that no one should touch the nobles. Lang had always regarded it as a sacred law. But as he grew older, he could not accept the actions of the nobles. Still, he always remembered the former king's blessing and did not act ruthlessly against the nobles. At this moment, this scene was constantly stimulating Lang's conscience and sense of justice. It made him tremble uncontrollably. However, as the hope of the kingdom, Duque had a direct conflict with the old nobles, which was not what he wanted to see. For a moment, Lang was a little confused. On the other side, the nobles were in an uproar. Duque was a hothead. Why did he have to be so stupid? Why did he have to act up at this time? Shouldn't the nobles have discussed all the conditions behind the scenes, and only when the negotiations failed would they have no choice but to stand on their respective sides and fight? Flipping out at the slightest disagreement? That's why they hated those ignorant peasants becoming nobles. The nobles were smart. Of course, they would not entangle with Duque over this matter that had already been sentenced to death. Apologize. Your actions are a despicable act that tarnishes the reputation of all nobles. Yes, apologize. Immediately apologize to Marquis Damonen. Otherwise, we will not recognize your noble status. The group of nobles clamored, clinging to the fact that Duque had violated the nobility's etiquette. Duque's cold snort caused the temperature of the entire hall to drop by more than 5 degrees. Nobility's etiquette, nobility's standards. Fine, I'll do things according to the nobility's etiquette. When Duque finished speaking, the nobles breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the hothead Duque had finally given in. Who knew that in the next second, Duque would throw a white glove at the Marquis' face? Well, for the sake of etiquette, nobles would always wear white gloves. And throwing a white glove at the other party's face meant only one thing: a duel. When the conflict between two nobles was so big that it could no longer be resolved, they could settle it with a duel with a suitable notary. Those who refused to duel would be seen as the greatest shame of the nobles, and would never be accepted by other nobles for the rest of their lives. Duel. Didn't you think that I insulted you just now? Then duel with me to wash away the shame. Duque's cold and arrogant eyes stared at Marquis Damonen. That pair of indifferent eyes made the Marquis' hair stand on end. The next moment, Duque pulled out his sword. Duque didn't have a sword of his own. It was a flame sword that he made out of fire elemental essence and copied the standard longsword of Stormwind City out of thin air. The fire elemental essence that was supposed to be extremely hot and violent was actually as tame as a puppy in Duque's hand. If it wasn't for the blazing aura that could be clearly felt from a dozen meters away, no one would think that it was a real flame. No, I didn't think you insulted me. Marquis Damonen actually shrank back. Well, after killing so many people, one would naturally have a murderous aura. Duque made his debut, killing gnolls, murlocs, nagas, and orcs. Recently, he had even roasted thousands of orcs into charcoal. His murderous aura was definitely at the level of overflowing dominance. On top of that, he had killed Sargeras. According to the legends, he had killed 7 people in the tribal camp. Even if Duque was known to be a swordsman, which nobleman would be stupid enough to fight him? You don't dare? You have no balls. Duque spat out his poisonous tongue mercilessly. Just when everyone thought that was the end, More than 3 dozen white gloves suddenly flew through the air and landed on the oily and disgusting faces of the nobles who had been heckling just now. Chapter 177. It was a white glove that was as thin as a cicada's wing made of ice. Although it was made of ice elements, it was indeed in the shape of a white glove. What did Duque mean? Whoever is not convinced can come and fight me. Who else? The nobles were silent, not daring to make a sound. Duque roared, "That's right. I am insulting you. I look down on you. If the nobles are indifferent, selfish, greedy for life, afraid of death, disregard the law, corrupt and arrogant, then the nobles, I don't want to be an earl anymore." As soon as these words came out, the whole room was silent. Don't want to be an earl anymore? If it was during peacetime, the nobles would have immediately roared. What do you think the face of Stormwind is? But now, Duque was indispensable. Almost all the sailors and fishermen were Duque's people. Duque, who had snatched back the warship, had his reputation in the navy soar. There was also the Naga and the Murlocs, whose strength was unknown. Countless people now only remembered Sea King Duque, who had saved everyone's lives, Duque, who had risked his life to kill the orc camp and burn hundreds of thousands of orcs, and Duque, who had risked his life to kill the Devil King for the survival of mankind. But unconsciously, they had forgotten the failed King Lang, who had lost his territory. It was no exaggeration to say that Duque had become a symbol of hope in the hearts of the people, whether they wanted to admit it or not. Now, Duque was saying that he should not be an earl? With Duque's strength, with Duque's fame, with Duque's wealth, which human country would he not be a guest of honor? Without Duque, the entire line of defense of Stormwind City might collapse in 3 days, and then hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians would be wiped out by the orcs. To some extent, it should be Stormwind that had fallen into poverty that could not contain a great god like Duque. Now, it was Duque who was forcing her to abdicate. Lang stood up abruptly and looked at Duque in disbelief. He had never thought that things would develop to this point. Duque had completely stood on the opposite side of the aristocratic class that he was defending. Unfortunately, he couldn't even say the word, no. Duque abruptly turned around, his eyes shining as he stared at King Lang. I'm forcing her to abdicate, but I'm not asking for more power. I'm just forcing your majesty to wake up. Proudly stepping forward, Duque puffed out his chest and sucked in his stomach. I've never been born noble. People are only noble because of their noble behavior. Thoradin the Great, the founder of the Arathor Empire, was the same. 1,000 years ago, the king who led the abandoned people to this valley and founded Stormwind was the same. Why was it noble? Why did the late king set the iron rule that no one can be conferred a title without military merit? The entire meeting hall fell into silence. Only the sound of the wind passing through the windows and sweeping through the hall could be heard. Not only the kings, dukes, and other high-ranking people, but even the royal guards at the side seemed to be lost in thought. They stroked the lion carvings on the edge of their swords, their eyes filled with a thoughtful look. Duque's voice continued. But isn't it for today? For today, when mankind is in danger of extinction, to be able to have a true hero and leader worthy of his position, to lead the people out of their predicament and out of despair? In the hall, the eyes of the nobles shrank and dimmed. But the eyes of Lang, Andoin, Bolvar, and the group of guards lit up. Stormwind City is destined to fall, but one day in the future, when Stormwind City is to be recovered, when this great kingdom is to be revived. Please answer me, the great and wise King Rin. At this point, Duque suddenly raised his head and looked straight at Lang with his sharp eyes. Are you counting on these so-called nobles who abandoned their people and fled with their wealth to serve you? Or are you counting on those who are truly willing to fight to the end for the future of mankind? Tell me, King Lang Rin, and everyone present who has opened their eyes. Tell me, who do you choose? Duque's voice that shook the heart was filled with a firm and sonorous feeling. Every brick, every piece of wall decoration, every inch of ceiling in the hall echoed with Duque's question. In just a moment, every truly courageous person in the hall unsheathed their sword and raised it high in the air. I choose Duke Marcus. Windsor, who had once saved the king's life, was the first to step out. This was the choice of the loyal minister of the kingdom. Duke Marcus, the upright and plain-spoken Duke for Dragon, stepped out and raised his sword high. This was the choice of the important minister of the kingdom. Beside him, there were nearly 10 superior nobles who were famous for their integrity who raised their swords. The Lion of Azeroth, the king's childhood friend, and the most loyal and courageous Sir Lothar also raised his sword high and made his most important choice. Father, I choose Duque, the only heir of the kingdom, the future king, and the future legend of the generation, Varian Rin, made a choice that placed the future of the entire kingdom on the line. Reginald Windsor, Bolvar for Dragon, Anduin Lothar. Each and every one of these heroes, who were familiar to the later generations, used their actions to show their attitude. Even Prince Varian Rin, who was supposed to evacuate in the third batch of ships and was still in the council hall, raised his short sword and shouted with them. Duque. The voice was like the howling of the wind, like thunder from the ninth heaven that could penetrate one's soul, and it crashed into Lang's heart. Lang felt that he was in an incomparably silent world. There was nothing in the world, only his own heart was shouting strongly. The voice that was becoming clearer and more precise came from himself, from his ancestors, and from the heroes who had sacrificed their lives for the survival and reproduction of mankind. Countless voices converged into a unique force, pushing him to make a choice at the crossroads of fate. Scorching hot blood rumbled as it flowed out from his heart, spreading to his 4 limbs, to his 5 viscera and 6 bowels, to every corner of his body, agitated and surging. Standing at the crossroads, his eyes seemed to see the future for a moment. To the left, he seemed to see the Stormwind, who trusted the corrupt nobles, completely destroyed in the flames. To the right, he seemed to see the destroyed Stormwind city being reborn from the flames with the help of Duque, Anduin, and other loyal and capable ministers. Yes, he might not be able to see the end of this heroic epic. The new era must belong to the next generation. Yet he was able to compose the most splendid beginning to this great human epic. For a moment, Cleon was so shocked that he could not control himself. He pulled out the king's sword and raised it above his head. His gaze seemed to penetrate the fog of fate. Lang made up his mind. Chapter 178. The loyal and brave generals of Stormwind raised the swords in their hands. They could feel the passion in the eyes of their most beloved king. Unknowingly, their breathing and their hearts had synchronized with the king's. It was an inexplicable throbbing of their hearts. One by one, they entered a mysterious state of trance. It was as if they had traveled through time and space to see thousands of years ago, when their ancestors set up the first stone tablet in this strange and lush valley, declaring this place to be called Stormwind City. They seemed to see their ancestors cutting through thorns and thorns, seeing colorful insects fleeing from the grass under their feet, and seeing this land become a paradise for humans. They also seemed to see King Lang, who had inherited the will of their ancestors, about to make a great decision that would change the fate of the entire kingdom. The usually noisy assembly hall was filled with a sacred air that was both familiar and strange at the same time. It was as if they were having a mass in the Storm Cathedral, listening to the Archbishop's sermon and feeling the gaze of the statues on the 2 sides. The eyes of these great pioneers crossed thousands of years and quietly watched Lang. Quiet and holy. The loyal and brave generals chose to listen, and the despicable nobles gave up on defending. The meeting hall fell into absolute silence. It was as if the whole world had quieted down, just for that holy answer. Lang's eyes were wide open, and his blue pupils were filled with a sense of sublime clarity. The golden lion flag with a blue base and golden edges, which had been passed down in Stormwind for thousands of years, emitted a brilliant light behind him. His voice was clear and magnetic, full of penetrating power, and had an irresistible majesty. I, King Lang Rin of Stormwind, hereby declare that 20 noble families, led by Duke Farron's family, have abused their power, degenerated and colluded with demons. They have disgraced the name of the nobility, and are a disgrace to the nobility. The names of all 20 noble families are hereby abolished, and all remaining noble children are demoted to commoners. The property they have obtained through improper means will be distributed to the meritorious soldiers in this battle as an example. I declare that anyone, regardless of origin, age, race, or gender, as long as they have made great contributions to Stormwind, will be conferred the title of nobility. Similarly, anyone who dares to betray the interests of humans will be punished by Stormwind, no matter how far away they are. Meritorious service will be rewarded, and crimes will be punished. Anyone who goes against this oath, no matter their background, no matter their status, they will all be killed. It was like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. Everyone's face was filled with intense shock. Lang's spirit and boldness could reach such a level. No king would dare to wipe out half of the nobles in the country in one go, but Lang dared. No monarch dared to link the supreme position with merits, but Lang dared. No ruler would have the guts to use talents so freely, but only Lang dared. Even though Duque's actions behind the scenes had caused shocking losses to the nobles and placed it in front of Lang as a fait accompli, even though Duque had used the great crisis of the country's destruction to blackmail Lang, in the end, it was still Lang who made the decision. Lang had made the wisest decision. No, it was even wiser than Duque had expected. It was already the realm of a great man. Based on these 3 points, as long as Lang's Stormwind did not really destroy the country, and as long as Lang's bloodline and policies could continue, Lang was bound to leave a thick stroke in the history of humans in Azeroth. Everyone present felt that their souls had received some kind of mysterious sublimation at this moment. If the resistance against the invasion of the tribes was a glorious hymn, an epic that originally did not belong to a single person, then at this moment, there was only one protagonist, Lang Rin. For humans, for Azeroth, Lang shouted. For humans, for Azeroth, Duque, Anduin, and the others echoed in unison. The feeling of excitement lingered for a long time. Everyone's chest rose and fell violently. They looked at each other and saw the same smile in each other's eyes. Lang glanced coldly at the nobles who had tried to force him to abdicate. "Gentlemen, you may leave now. It's time to discuss confidential military affairs. It has nothing to do with you." Lothar and Duke for Dragons stepped forward at the same time. Beside them, more than 10 royal guards formed a fan shape. The nobles' mouths twitched, and there was an unconcealable cowardice in their eyes. In the end, they did not protest anymore, and quietly left. This scene was painted into a famous painting by a later artist based on the eyewitness account. It was auctioned off for a sky-high price of 3 million gold coins. The title of the painting was The End of the Decaying Era. After the nobles left, the huge meeting hall seemed empty. Lang and the others immediately moved to a smaller, more private meeting room. Including the guards, there were no more than 20 people in the meeting room. But these people would become the core of Stormwind's power. If Stormwind could survive, Bolvar was firmly on Duque's side just now. But now he was the first to speak up. "Oh, my wise Archmage Marcus. Although I would like to thank you for helping the kingdom get more than 50 ships, I can't take it anymore. When you and Lothar went to save the situation, the kingdom lost nearly 3,000 elite soldiers. This is the total number of those who died and could no longer go to the battlefield." Everyone's expression was ugly. The kingdom could not afford to train a qualified soldier for too long. Even if the speed of transporting soldiers and civilians could be nearly doubled, the current situation was that the line of defense would likely collapse before that. Lang walked over and put one hand on Duque's shoulder. He looked calmly into Duque's eyes. "I will not regard what you just did as an attempt to force me to abdicate. Stormwind has been sick for a long time. You just gave me the determination to cut off this rotten flesh. But the kingdom's new life still depends on the efforts of the younger generation. I think that since you gave me so many perfect answers before, you won't disappoint me this time, right?" If Duque could so perfectly force the aristocrats to leave, but was unable to come up with anything useful in the following military conference, and was cheated by Stormwind, that would be a real joke. But Duque was Duque, a miraculous person who would never disappoint his supporters. Duque smiled lightly. "Of course you won't be disappointed, Your Majesty. First, please allow me to introduce you to an important guest. Please, my follower, Aitana, and the guest she has brought." Lang nodded with an indifferent smile. The door of the meeting room opened. Not long after, a freckled female wizard wearing the wizard robe of the Stormwind royal family's wizard group entered with a guest. The guest made the expressions of many of Stormwind's upper echelons stiffen, because the so-called guest turned out to be a goblin. Chapter 179. Aitana, who hadn't seen her for a long time, now looked a little more capable and experienced than Duque. Even though Aitana was a person who had seen the world, she still felt a little uneasy when she suddenly saw so many big shots of the kingdom. After a few deep breaths, she quickly adjusted her emotions. Your Majesty, Your Excellencies, I am the follower of Earl Duke Marcus, Aitana. Please allow me to introduce you to Mr. Sherlock Belfort, a goblin engineering merchant from Stranglethorn Valley. Greetings, Your Majesty. Greetings, Your Excellencies. Goblin Sherlock gave a very standard aristocratic salute. Although his movements were very standard, none of the kingdom's higher-ups present knew how to face this goblin, the infamous goblin. Unlike the goblins in the novels that Duque had read before he traveled to this world, the goblins were generally dirty, despicable, low IQ, and amazingly fertile. They harmed humans all year round. Although the goblins in the world of Azeroth were also humanoid creatures, they had green skin that was no different from orcs, were only slightly taller than a human's knee, had thin, matchstick-like limbs, and had a pointed head and large eyes. How to put it, some of their inferior qualities were 100% inherited, such as harming humans. But overall, the goblins in Azeroth loved money more, were good at all kinds of technological inventions, and were better at running businesses. The goblins had set up many companies, which were similar to the structure of real companies before Duque traveled to this world. However, these so-called companies were also more vampire-like, such as the notorious Venture Capital Corporation. There was a joke that reflected the reputation of the Venture Capital Corporation very well. Venture Capital Corporation, please join our company. We have investments in every corner of Azeroth. Someone asked, what's the price? Venture Capital Corporation, we're being hunted by the whole world. Someone was speechless. The actions of the goblins were absolutely abhorrent. Many night elf druids would kill every goblin they saw, and if they saw two, they would kill a pair. Seeing the appearance of the goblin merchant, Noxus pointed at his head at Duque without hesitation. What he meant was, are you crazy? They were actually working with gnomes. Duque smiled and ignored Lothar. He slightly changed the classic sentence from Das Kapital. Hey, Sherlock, I heard that if there is a 20% profit, the goblins will be restless. If there is a 50% profit, the goblins will dare to take risks. If there is a 100% profit, the goblins will dare to take the risk of being hanged. If there is a 300% profit, the goblins will dare to trample all the laws of the world. Is it true? Sherlock screamed on the spot. Slander! This was definitely slander. We goblins are of noble character. If I give you 5 million Arather gold coins to bring me the head of the tribal chief, Blackhand, Sherlock's small eyes. Perhaps it was an illusion, but they seemed to have widened 10 times in an instant. Sherlock's sharp voice instantly became incomparably sonorous and powerful, resolute and courageous. I promised to complete the mission. At the same time, Sherlock had already rushed over recklessly and extended his right hand towards Duke, rubbing his index and middle fingers continuously. But in the next second, he felt that Duque was joking. Your Excellency Sea King, are you playing with me? No, I am just proving to His Majesty the Storm King that you have supreme courage in the face of money. Be it Lang, Andoin, or Bolvar, they all looked as if they were having a hard time holding back their laughter. Sherlock still wanted to flip out. Duque's words were like a bucket of cold water poured over Sherlock's head. Don't think that I don't know the strength of your so-called suicide squad. It might be possible for you to kill a tribe chief of 10. Great chief? If I really gave you the deposit, you would only send a group of cannon fodder to their deaths, and then run away with the highest deposit you could negotiate. Sherlock Belfort's face instantly turned pale. He lowered his head and stammered, that we goblins are all trustworthy and pay attention to business ethics. How could we do such a thing? As he spoke, under Duque's piercing gaze, Sherlock became more and more guilty. His pair of feet also moved towards the door unintentionally. Unexpectedly, a pair of magician's hands suddenly appeared behind Sherlock and lifted the short goblin in front of Duque. I have no interest in the integrity of the goblins. The only thing I am interested in is the engineering craftsman in your venture capital company. What do you want? Has Aitana already told you? His life was in the hands of this terrifying mage. Sherlock nodded his head like an aggrieved little wife. All right, I want to add another condition. If everything explodes before it is thrown out, for every person on our side that is injured, I will take the life of one of your relatives, cut off one of your fingers, and deduct 100 boxes of money. Sherlock was indifferent to the previous conditions, but when Duque said 100 boxes of money for each damaged item, Sherlock suddenly made a sound like a pig being slaughtered. He bared his fangs and brandished his claws. No goblin will accept such conditions. Don't even think about it. Duque sneered. What if I increase the price by 10% and double the quantity? 30% higher. Sherlock immediately calmed down and bargained. Nonsense, don't think I don't know what you are using. Heavy rock could be made into high explosive, iron ingot, and silk, and it would be done. With such low cost, you still dare to charge me 30% more? Sherlock was dumbfounded. Then, like a general who had defeated a general, he finally nodded. All right, 10% is 10%. Just like that, Sherlock retreated with a long face. Aitana was very nervous and hurriedly apologized. I didn't know, so those things will explode before they are thrown out. Duque rubbed his eyebrows and thought to himself, damn, gnome projects are unreliable, goblin projects always explode. If I didn't know this, then I would have played the game for nothing. You are not in this field. It's not your fault. After comforting Aitana, Duque finally turned to Lang and explained, didn't you say that you have tens of thousands of militia but don't know how to use them? Weren't you guys worried about how to evacuate the last of the defenders? I will solve all of these problems for you all at once. Not only that, I will also throw in a big gift package. What gift package? Lang was stunned. Duque smiled mysteriously. Now that I say it, it no longer feels mysterious. Chapter 180. For 2 days in a row, the east and north walls of Stormwind City were filled with battle cries. However, the people of Stormwind City would never have thought that such a terrifying battle was just a test by the Horde. It was just a test. During the absence of Duque and Andoin, Bolvar was in charge of the defense. Although he knew that the Horde was only sending 1,000 men to test the waters, Bolvar had no choice but to fight with all his might. The difference in individual combat power was too obvious. There were moats, barbicans, city walls, arrow towers, and towering hills equipped with catapults. Such a three-dimensional defense system only erased the disadvantage that the humans had when fighting against the orcs in terms of individual combat. The battle was still very difficult. The 5-meter-tall city wall was still too short for the tall and strong orcs, who were unreasonably strong in terms of athleticism. Orgrim gave Blackhand a stupid idea, but it was also the most effective one, and Bolvar was at a loss of what to do. Fill the river when you see it, build a slope when you see it. The laborers who were dwarves in the eyes of the Horde's warriors but were burly men in the eyes of the humans carried a large number of rocks and braved the deadly rain of javelins to throw the rocks into the moat before turning around and leaving. The process repeated. In just a day, the urgently dug moat was filled by nearly a third. Duke Bolvar could not imagine how tragic the situation would be when the humans were forced to fight the green-skinned monsters in the streets after losing their geographical advantage. However, the greatest consolation was that Duque had returned. His strength alone was no less than half of the Wang family's team of mages. Are you really not going to do anything? Lothar asked Duque on top of an arrow tower. Duque shook his head. No, I'm not going to do anything. It's more beneficial for us. But because our main opponent is the chief's deputy, Orgrim, and not the chief himself. Lothar recalled what Garona had said about the tribe's chiefs and well-known figures. He remembered that Orgrim's specialty was that he was wiser than the other orcs. He's a powerful orc warrior with the wisdom of a shaman's. Deity explained, if I had saved the situation from the start, Orgrim would have been able to identify the weak points in the defensive line faster. In fact, my final defensive position is not here. I still have to rely on you guys here. Lothar played with an iron lump with a wooden handle as long as a palm. Are you sure we can survive 10 days with this? Deity said with absolute certainty, I'm sure. Alright, I believe you. The rumbling of tribal war drums could be heard from every corner of the city wall near the mountain range. Old Dem was a porter. Apart from his strength, he was practically useless. He, who was over 50 years old, joined the militia purely because he could get a ticket for his daughter and grandson to leave early by signing up for the militia. Lying on the battlements, Old Dem held onto a helmet that had been dented in when he descended. It was obviously taken from a dead man's head as he trembled and looked out. Beside him was his old neighbor Kana, a baker. Kana kept asking in a low voice, "Have we arrived? Have we arrived?" Old Dem looked at the countless green figures surging towards the moat and felt his hair stand on end. Wait, not yet. Old Dem's heart trembled as he looked at the green giants with their terrifying faces and long fangs. At this moment, the kingdom's soldier in charge of supervising them suddenly shouted, "Militia, get ready to throw that thing. Before I give the order, no one is allowed to open the lid below." Old Dem and Kana immediately tensed up. Calm down. Calm down. Wait for those damned greenskins to attack. Looking at the signal flag on the command tower behind the city wall, all the kingdom's soldiers shouted in unison the moment the red flag dropped. Old Dem followed the steps he had taught them and hurriedly opened the lid below the wooden handle. Instantly, the sound of fireworks being ignited could be heard from the other end of the wooden handle. Most of the people were illiterate and did not know that it was a fuse. Throw it with all your might. The commanding officer's roar caused many people to slip up and directly throw these strange wooden sticks with metal pimples into the moat below. There were even some idiots who accidentally dropped the sticks onto the battlements. It was the soldiers in charge of supervising who were quick to react. They swung their arms around and threw the thing across the moat. A few seconds later, when the terrifying green dwarfs carried the boulders and ran to the moat, the green dwarfs suddenly stopped. Boom, boom, boom. A series of continuous explosions stunned both the humans and the orcs. This day, this moment, was worthy of commemoration. Because this was the first time in the history of Azeroth that a firearm had appeared. Even though it was an unreliable product of the goblins, the metal grenade was a killing weapon that would forever be recorded in the history books. What dodging? What resisting? In the face of such firearms that transcended the era, the struggles of the orc laborers seemed to be meaningless. The orc laborers could only watch as their comrades were annihilated. Boom, boom, boom. The continuous explosions were accompanied by the flying pieces of metal due to the explosion of the high explosives. This caused a terrible second injury to the laborers, who were only wearing thin clothes and even had their upper bodies bare. Even 10 meters away from the explosion range, some of the laborers had their throats slit by the flying shrapnel and died. The first batch of metal grenades not only took the lives of all the orc laborers by the riverbank in an instant, some of the grenades that fell into the water also exploded into the sky. In the face of such a terrifying and incomprehensible scene, the orc laborers began to waver. They abandoned their duties and forgot that there was a supervising team not far behind them. They threw down the rocks that should have fallen into the moat and turned to run. However, most of them did not run far before they were killed by the orc supervising team as if they were chopping vegetables. What is that? Orgrim cried out in shock. Let the second wave go. Great Chieftain Blackhand did not care. The second wave of laborers screamed and cried as they were forced to go forward by the orc soldiers with machetes and axes. However, the green formation once again collapsed after another batch of strange lumps of wood was suddenly thrown down from the city wall. The laborers broke down even earlier than their comrades who had died earlier. Almost as soon as the explosion sounded, the last batch of them started to run back. To escape the death that the supervising team brought upon them, they even waved the huge rocks in their hands in an attempt to resist. Of course, They were all cut down in pools of blood without exception. What the hell is that? Orgrim roared. Chapter 181. Through the telescope, Anduin and Bolvar watched the bloody battlefield and the orc laborers who were groaning in pain as they walked towards death. Anduin and Bolvar were tongue-tied. Damn it, these goblins make me feel like I've wasted my years of martial arts training. Anduin smacked his lips, seemingly thirsty from unease. Duque, how many did you order? I want more of these iron skin grenades. Bolvar was even more direct, demanding an exorbitant price right from the start. Duque smiled without saying a word as he handed over a price list. It listed the price of the iron skin grenades, as well as the skyrocketing price that would require the goblins to work overtime to produce them. More importantly, Duque had specially noted that the already terrible rate of misfires and premature explosions would skyrocket due to the rushed production. That's right, in this era where there was no mechanized mass production, where everything was done by hand, how high could the success rate be? As long as one was human, they would make mistakes and get tired, and there would be differences in the accuracy of each product. And the goblins' lax way of doing things meant that all the products created by these damned and whimsical fellows were extremely dangerous. Bolvar's conscience did not allow him to let his soldiers and militia take such a huge risk. If they did not kill the enemy, and instead blew themselves up first, they would have no place to cry. Anduin was magnanimous. We should comfort ourselves like this. Yo, a box of grenades is enough to arm a militia regiment. Duque smiled. A militia regiment needs to undergo a long period of training, but this thing only needs half a day of training. That was not wrong. Ordinary infantry training required a long period of combat training to have a little bit of success. Even so, the survival rate of new recruits on the battlefield was so low that it gave any commander a headache. Not to mention the humans who were already at a disadvantage in terms of physique. The strength, speed, and agility of the human recruits were probably similar to the orcs' cannon fodder laborers. There was a considerable gap between them and the official orc warriors. Moreover, the opponents were not ordinary orc soldiers. After fighting for so long, any human commander with a brain would know that they were the elites of the Blackrock clan, a powerful orc clan. Although that was what he said, he still had a toothache. Bolvar sucked in a breath of cold air. I feel like you're throwing away His Majesty's gold coins. Duque shrugged. War is about money. Anduin pursed his lips. I've realized for a long time that your way of thinking is completely different from ours. I sometimes wonder if you're from Azeroth. Duque was non-committal. What should Duque say? Say I'm a transmigrator? That would really be laughable. The archers, who had long been determined to be useless against the orcs, were once again used to deal with the orcs. Archers also had a fatal weakness. Once it was nighttime, the power of an archer would be greatly reduced even if they used area shooting. The appearance of the iron skin grenade greatly enriched the strategies and tactics of the human side. After all, an archer needed to aim properly, and a grenade would explode everywhere. As time passed, the orcs also discovered the drawbacks of the iron skin grenades. These metal lumps that made loud noises were a great threat to the orc laborers. However, to the real orc warriors, especially those who wore more armor, it was not a fatal injury. It was difficult for the shrapnel from the explosion to penetrate the muscles of the tall orc warriors. As long as the vital parts were not hit, most of them would only suffer superficial wounds. Under Orgrim's suggestion, the great chief Blackhand agreed to better arm the orc warriors who were attacking the city walls. Hence, in the next few days, Lothar saw a large number of orc warriors using cowhide, metal pieces, and even the armor of the dead human warriors to make a temporary armor. With the orcs' protection, the iron skin grenades, which were originally relatively lethal, were reduced by half. They became less lethal weapons. Lothar asked Duque, "Do those damned green-skinned dwarves have anything more powerful?" Duque silently handed over the price of the high-explosive bomb, which required a large amount of thorium to make and was recommended by the profiteer Sherlock. Lothar was stunned for a full 10 seconds before he finally said, "The weather is really good today." Yes, it was noon with high temperatures and a thunderstorm. Thanks to the thunderstorm, all the bowstrings almost lost their elasticity due to the humidity. It was a tug-of-war. However, the scales of victory still tipped towards the orcs. When Orgrim had the orc laborers wear thick leather armor or thick clothes, he restarted the plan to fill up the river. Lothar knew that something was wrong. On the 7th day after Deity dealt with the Bloodsail pirates, the moat on the east and north sides of Stormwind City was filled up. The orcs even used orc laborers to pile up stones at many places to build a slope that led to the barbican in front of the city walls. The barbican had almost become a pit. Orgrim seemed to be addicted to piling up stones, and he still had a large number of orc laborers rush over. Throw the stones into the human's pit. If you can't make it back, then throw yourself in as well. That was Orgrim's order to these weak orc laborers. The direct result was that the number of orc laborers dying increased exponentially. At first, the humans tried to clean up some orc work or dig up some slopes every night. However, Stormwind City was severely lacking in heavy machinery. Not only were the gnome excavators expensive to rent, but Sherlock was also unwilling to let his subordinates drive the expensive robots into the city that was bound to fall. Unless Sherlock rubbed his thumb, index finger, and middle finger together again. That gesture of asking for money. You know what it means. Deity was held up. Just as he expected, the Horde quickly discovered Stormwind City's weakness. It was the place to the north of Stormwind City near Stormwind Port. It was different from the steep cliffs of the valley in the south. The mountain roads to the north of Stormwind City were dangerous for the humans, but for the orcs who were good at climbing mountains, it was not a true dead end. In the first 2 times, the orcs successfully sent a few scouts down, causing a commotion among the citizens of Stormwind City. After that, King Lang decisively let Deity, who was the strongest fighter in Stormwind City, guard the mountain peak. This prevented the orcs from attacking from that direction. The sea, on the other hand, was the domain of Kurtalas and Duke. Even though they could transport more than 10,000 people per day, the situation was still going downhill. After the citizens of Stormwind City held on for more than 20 days, the biggest problem for Lang and the citizens to cover the retreat had arrived. Excluding the evacuees and those who died in battle, there were still 10,000 people left. Lothar estimated that none of the 50,000 people would be able to escape. The orcs were already in a frenzy. They would not allow the humans to evacuate at a rate of 10,000 a day. Stormwind Port, which was their lifeline, did not have a fulcrum like Stormwind Fortress. What should they do? Chapter 182. Over at the Horde, Orgrim was troubled as well. This was because there was a very important fulcrum in his plan that he couldn't break through. The fulcrum was Garona, the female beastman that Orgrim had caught by accident, but she had a tough backbone that exceeded Orgrim's expectations. Perhaps it had something to do with Garona growing up as a slave. She had an unimaginable tolerance for pain. The straightforward beastmen weren't good at interrogations. All of their interrogation methods were based on simple violence. If Orgrim wanted to get the location of the Shadow Council from Garona, he couldn't really kill her. However, not only was Garona incredibly tough, there seemed to be a mysterious power in her body. Once Garona's life force dropped to a certain level, it would wrap around her. Even if Orgrim used Hammer of Destruction, he wouldn't be able to break it. When this mysterious orc's life force and stamina recovered to a certain level, Garona would become a captive once again. This situation was driving Orgrim crazy. He was indeed eager to overthrow the great chief Blackhand to avenge his good friend Durotan. Unfortunately, he couldn't capture the Shadow Council or Ghoul Dan. Even if he defeated the great chief, he would still be treating the symptoms and not the root of the problem. Once the Shadow Council, hiding in the dark like a poisonous snake, made Orgrim's scalp go numb just thinking about the mysterious power of the curse. The only good news was that the humans couldn't hold on much longer. Every day, there would be more than one wave of orc assault teams breaking through the moat. Some even crossed the Barbican and rushed up to the city walls. If it wasn't for the elite emergency forces that the humans had formed to suppress the orcs' attacks with a large number of long-range attacks, the city walls might have already been breached. Orgrim was still conflicted. Stormwind was the first large foreign kingdom they encountered after crossing the portal. Conquering its capital was definitely a great honor. If this honor was accomplished by the current Great Chief Blackhand, then even if Orgrim succeeded in the challenge, most of the orcs in the horde would still remember the former Great Chief's good deeds. Even if he achieved even more glorious victories in the future, the simple-minded orcs would still think that he stole Blackhand's achievements and continued to follow Blackhand's path of victory. Just thinking about it made him feel like he was suffocating. As the great chieftain of the future generation, Orgrim's greatest strength aside from his insane combat ability was his intellect. He was one of the rare great chieftains among the orcs who had foresight and were so cold that they were almost utilitarian. When he didn't have absolute control over everything, he would choose to be patient. However, on the 25th day of the siege, Orgrim sensed that the humans' combat power had reached a critical point. "You said that there are no more than 100,000 humans in Stormwind City?" Orgrim had a complicated reaction to the scout's report. Yes, when the situation is calm, humans can evacuate about 10,000 people a day. However, there have been a few days of strong winds and heavy rain recently, and the retreat of the humans has almost come to a halt, the scout leader reported. Orgrim felt his heart ache. If the humans didn't have so many tricks up their sleeves and only relied on the low city wall, the tribe would be able to breach the city in 2 or 3 days. At that time, hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians were captured. Not less than 100,000. The tribe wouldn't have to sacrifice more than 20,000 warriors and 70,000 orc laborers during this period of time. Thinking about this, Orgrim felt his heart ache. At the beginning, the humans didn't have any power to fight back, but now they were able to attack and defend, causing the tribe's losses to increase. Even if the simple-minded people in the tribe still thought that the humans were useless, Orgrim knew that if they let too many of them escape, the tribe would have to pay twice the price to wipe them out in the future. He couldn't wait any longer. No matter what price he had to pay, he had to destroy the enemy's rearguard here. If he couldn't truly destroy the humans' combat power, this battle-hardened army would become the tribe's biggest problem in the future. Thinking about this, Orgrim no longer hesitated. He wanted to advise the great chieftain to launch an all-out attack tonight. At the same time, in Stormwind Keep, the few people who held the fate of the Stormwind Kingdom gathered together. Duque said softly, "The Horde's all-out attack will be tonight." Lang suddenly looked up. "Are you sure?" "I purposely let the Horde scouts pass through my defensive line to observe Stormwind Port." Duque's casual words gave people a strong feeling that everything was under Duque's control. Noxus took a deep breath. Indeed, the last 50,000 is the minimum number of troops needed to defend Stormwind City. Bolvar suddenly looked up at Duque, then at Lang. "Your Majesty, I strongly suggest that you leave with the last batch of ships tonight. You are the king of Stormwind." "Enough, Bolvar." King Lang suddenly stopped the loyal Bolvar. "Since Duque said that he had the confidence to send us away at the last moment, what else do we have to hesitate about? I can't accept running away like a coward, abandoning my people who trusted me. If you want to ensure that Stormwind has a king, Varian has already been sent to Southshore." These words were already very harsh, almost cutting to the heart. Bolvar had almost risked his life to speak, but his words were undoubtedly a vote of no confidence in Duque, who had been so slow in coming up with the final plan. "My apologies, Duque. Bolvar is just..." Lang scolded Bolvar, and immediately turned to apologize to Duque. "No, this is my problem. I should not have used His Majesty as a part of the plan." "No, Duque, you did nothing wrong. You have already explained to me the risks that I will face. At worst, I, the King of Bereavement, will die for my country. No, it should be said that if this plan does not succeed, I would rather die for my country. I do not have the face to beg those fellows for charity like a stray dog." Lang suddenly raised his head, looking straight at Bolvar and the other most loyal subjects. Everyone could see the will to die in Lang's eyes. Wise and great, these had always been Lang's labels. But very few people had thought that Lang would rather die than submit, and would be so unyielding. Perhaps many people would think that losing to the powerful orcs was not such a shameful thing, but they neglected the feelings of a king who was determined to achieve great things, but had to give up his own capital and the 1,000-year foundation of his ancestors. Duque also sighed. In history, because Lang was assassinated, Stormwind City fell, and Lothar was forced to go into exile with the little prince Varian. Now, history had changed slightly, but the strength of the orcs had not changed. If not for Duque, perhaps Lang would still have died here. Alright, as long as you all listen to me, I can guarantee that even if Stormwind City falls, we will still be able to bite off a piece of meat from those green-skinned monsters. Chapter 183. For those who had never experienced a war, any description of a war would be feeble and hollow. Once, Duque naively thought that he could save everybody, but Lothar modified Duque's plan slightly. It was a magic image that was almost a video. There were no signs of life on the scorched land. Thick pillars of smoke that reached the sky were everywhere. The once prosperous fields had been abandoned, and the end of the horizon was full of dilapidated houses. The streets were littered with corpses. There were strong farmers, skinny old men, pregnant women with big bellies, and children less than 10 years old. Most of them had been decapitated, and their blood had already begun to dry up and turn black, proving how miserable and tragic the scene was at that time. Duque seemed to have heard the screams, howls, and cries that lingered in the village at that moment. Regardless of age, gender, or ability to fight, everybody had obviously been dragged to the square in the village for a unified massacre. It was a genocide to exterminate the entire human race. A game would always be a game. No matter from which angle it was described, it was not enough to describe the unforgettable impact on the soul. Lothar walked over and patted Duque's shoulder. "Your plan is great, but you're still too young." Duque's mouth was half open and half closed, as if he wanted to argue, but in the end, the words became, "At least let me go with you to see off the soldiers." Briefly stunned, Lothar stared into Duque's eyes and said only one word, "Okay." The sun had already set, and the moon was hazy in the sky, as if it were morning for Stormwind City that had stood for 1,000 years but was about to fall. A large number of troops gathered in the open space outside of Stormwind Fortress. 10,000 soldiers stood solemnly in the shadow of Stormwind Fortress in a silent, enormous square formation. On the continuous city walls between the districts of Stormwind City, torches had already been lit. The torches on every battlement on top of the city wall cast long swaying fiery red light on the square formation, emitting the clanging light of armor. It was the gathering of iron and blood. It was the reflection of hatred and fury. It was a volcano of fury that was about to erupt. The daring team had been assembled and silently waited for the order to attack. If one looked closely, they would notice that most of the members of the Suicide Squad were injured. Or light, or heavy. Some of the more serious ones even had their arms broken. Some of the more serious ones even had their intestines sticking out of their bodies, and they were merely holding them in their hands. The continuous battles had drained the spiritual power of all the priests in the city. They had used up all their medical supplies 10 days ago. If these people were left alone with the backward medical standards of this era, most of them would die. But even if he died, he had to die with value. Suddenly, a clear command sounded. "His Majesty Rin has arrived. Salute." With a series of clattering sounds, 10,000 people stood at attention at the same time. Their injuries had obviously affected them. Under normal conditions, the elite soldiers under Lothar's guidance would definitely be in sync and orderly, as if they were a single person. Duque, who was following behind Lang, Anduin, and Bolvar, suddenly felt a lump in his throat. Lang, in his golden armor, stood at the entrance of Storm's stronghold. His facial muscles twitched. Anduin Lothar stood beside the king. His loud voice, which was like the roar of a lion, spread throughout the entire army. "Warriors of the kingdom, His Majesty Rin has come personally to send you off, warriors." Silence. Nearly 10,000 people once again stood at attention and put their feet together. Walking down the slope, Lang, Duque, and the others slowly walked past the front of the formation. What kind of faces were they? There was no vigor, no vitality. Every face was filled with the paleness of walking towards death. However, every pair of eyes exuded an amazing desire to fight that was as blazing as fire, mixed with a murderous aura of hatred and anger. Every pair of eyes was shining with the will to fight to the death. Every warrior knew that they were going to die. It was just that before burning their lives, they wanted to give the invaders a fatal blow in the most severe way possible. Duque felt a lump in his throat. Lang looked around at the familiar and unfamiliar faces, and could not help but be moved. He patted the shoulders of every soldier in the first row and walked over. In the end, he still managed to control himself well and walked to the high platform that had been set up beforehand. Lang raised the big bowl filled with wine high, and the soldiers followed suit and raised the big wrists filled with wine. King Lang's clear voice spread in all directions. Azeroth has been invaded, and humans are being slaughtered wantonly like pigs and dogs. But we are very lucky. Everyone, please join me and raise the long swords in your hands against these damned green-skinned creatures. Be it me or you, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, we will all die in this damned war. But it doesn't matter, because we are dying for our children and grandchildren. I only hate that I, Lang Rin, can't accompany you to fight shoulder to shoulder tonight. But it doesn't matter, please leave first. When I see you again, I will either proudly tell you that I have taken back Stormwind City, or I will tell you that I died on the way to the charge, just like everyone else. Now, with this wine, I wish you all to chop off more orc heads. With that, Lang raised his head resolutely and drank the whole bowl of strong wine in one gulp. Looking at Lang's Adam's apple moving, Duque, Andoin, Bolvar, and the others raised their heads and drank in unison. It had to be said that this kind of golden wine originating from the dwarves had a strange, fiery feeling. The fiery turbulence rushed into his throat and flowed down his esophagus into his stomach. Duque suddenly felt a burning sensation all over his body. Duque, who did not like to drink, staggered, but he took a step back. Duque immediately steadied himself. Sir Marcus, I heard that you were the one who suggested this battle, so I would like to ask one last question. A veteran with his head wrapped in bandages and an empty left arm stepped out of the ranks. He raised the large plate of wine high and saluted Duque. There was a low buzz of discussion among the soldiers. Duque took a step forward, his mouth still spewing the strong smell of wine, but his mind was very clear. You ask, I will answer. The veteran grinned. It was a mouth with teeth stained with dirt. I am a rough man. I do not understand magic, nor do I understand any plans. I only know that my wife and children have died in this battle, so I have nothing to worry about. I just want to ask you, tonight, how many orc lives can my death be exchanged for? This was not only the voice of the veteran, but also the voice of the 10,000 warriors who were about to die. They were not afraid of death. The key was whether it was worth it. Duque's body trembled and he roared, 1 for 10. And I will use the head of the orc chief to lay the foundation for the heroic souls of our brothers. The veteran laughed proudly. Ha! I originally thought that killing 1 would be enough, and killing 2 would be a profit. I did not expect that I could go to hell while looking at the head of the tribe's chief. Ha! Even if I die, I am willing. He resolutely drank the wine in the large bowl in his hand, and with a crisp crack, he smashed the large plate into pieces. Behind him, 10,000 soldiers sat in the same position, and the sound of plates smashing could be heard. With tears in his eyes, Lang raised his hand. Set off. Chapter 184. The soldiers' heroic spirit soared to the sky, and they roared thunderously in a deep voice, Your Majesty, we will make a move first. But Cleon raised his sword. The cold light of the sword reflected off Cleon's handsome but no longer young face under the bright light of the fire. At this moment, Duque, who was standing beside Cleon, was affected by the tragic atmosphere. Unbeknownst to him, his tears had already begun to fall. An hour later, the Horde's war drums sounded as if they had agreed. The boorish roars of the Horde's warriors came from the east and north of the mountain range again. Dozens of goblins' special flares shot into the air and chased away the darkness. The Horde's attacking troops could be seen clearly. Not only were the smooth mountain paths filled with muscular Blackrock warriors, But there were also countless thick ropes hanging down from the steep mountain walls, and the burly figures of the orcs could be seen clearly. It was a real green tide. The sound of crossbows kept coming from the city wall. But the orcs continued to crazily rush towards the city wall despite the barrage of crossbow cannons and falling rocks. An orc's helmet and head were smashed into pieces by a rock, and his burly body fell down. He quickly became a stepping stone for the next orc, and he continued to rush up the city wall along the slope of rocks. An orc's chest was pierced by a javelin, but he still endured the feeling of his life slipping away and threw his battle axe at a human warrior on the city wall. Fierce battles were taking place in every corner of the entire eastern and northern city walls. The final battle had begun. The orcs were attacking Stormwind City, a golden lion that was riddled with scars. But even though it was weak, even though it was no match for the orcs, this lion still opened its sharp claws and gave the invaders the fiercest revenge. Not far away, Orgrim held his famous Hammer of Destruction and stood there in a daze. He saw the humans launch a brave and desperate counterattack against the orcs on the top of the city wall. Then, they were once again drowned by the orcs' green tide. Orgrim squinted his eyes, and he felt a bad omen. It was said that humans had 7 kingdoms, and those dwarves who were only as tall as their knees also had a kingdom. It was also said that there were also some thin and weak elves. If every kingdom resisted as fiercely as the Stormwind, how many of the warriors of the tribes would be able to return alive after repeated battles before conquering the world? Weak humans are nothing but prey with a little brain. They are no match for the warriors of the tribe. Not far from Orgrim, the great chief Black pointed at the city walls that had fallen into the hands of the horde and laughed loudly. Orgrim felt that something was wrong. Compared to the human elites he had fought a few days ago, these humans were clearly already injured before they charged at him, even though they seemed to be in a frenzied state of morale. Orgrim even ran to one of the watchtowers and was shocked to find that many of the dead soldiers had broken legs. Jumping off the arrow tower, Orgrim found Black Hand. "Great Chieftain, something's not right. The human elites aren't here." Black Hand raised his hardened black hand and pointed in all directions. There were roars and roars everywhere, and the sounds of fighting could be heard everywhere. Obviously, the weak humans are still putting up a resistance. Even if Orgrim didn't want to admit it, it was true. The sounds of fighting could not lie. At this time, an outpost rushed back to report. Reporting to Great Chief, the human defenders are retreating to the west port. But every block of the human city has walls and moats, and the resistance is very fierce. Stupid humans. Black Hand clutched his stomach and laughed. Orgrim saw from the light of the fire that the humans had turned almost every big house in the city into a stronghold. They had built barricades and ditches at every street entrance, forming small camps. Looking at the fierce resistance, it seemed like they were going to fight the horde in the streets. Fighting in the streets? Seeing this, Orgrim couldn't help but sneer. In the past, the Draenei had the help of the Shining Light, Holy Light, and excellent weapons, but the Draenei still couldn't defend Shotrath City. In urban warfare, where individual strength was the most important, Orgrim didn't think that any race could win against the warriors of the Horde. Black Hand laughed maniacally. If the human cities had more defenses like the outer city walls, and they used all their forces to defend the city walls, then the Horde might have to pay more sacrifices. But these weak humans are stupid. They actually want to fight in the streets, haha. This time, it wasn't just Orgrim, all the chieftains around Black Hand laughed along with him. No warrior is a match for the strongest warrior, the Beastman. In urban warfare, the javelins and cannons are useless. The humans are dead. Black Hand waved his huge hand. Attack through the night, we can't let a single human escape. You can take the other spoils of war, but leave the head of the opposing chief to me. Yes. The chiefs of the small and medium-sized tribes were overjoyed. They listened to the order and dispersed, returning to their own tribes to command their troops. Orgrim, lead your people to the port as soon as possible. I don't want to let another human escape. Understood. It would be a lie if the Beastmen weren't tired after days of attacking the city. But the high feeling of conquering the enemy's city made every single beastman feel invigorated. There was no more discipline, no more cooperation. The beastmen that remained near Stormwind City came out in full force. They slaughtered their way through every street and alley in Stormwind City. They killed anyone they saw, and if they saw something new, they would take it. Looking at the shiny gold and silver, the beastmen didn't think much of it. They just felt that it would be nice to melt them and make them into tooth ornaments. But when they saw the superior weapons of the humans, especially the sharp battle axes, the beastmen would often fight each other to fight over these rare spoils of war. Because this was the moment of victory, and also the blessing of the chief. The rough roars of the beastmen and the long line of raised torches filled every road and every street of Stormwind City. The sound of reckless footsteps gradually replaced the sounds of fierce fighting. No beastman cared where the humans went. Perhaps the humans were hiding in those big houses called churches and trembling. On every ugly green face, besides malevolence, there was also brutality and ecstasy that had been suppressed for a long time. Victory. Even though the humans had caused them a lot of trouble, victory was victory. Suddenly, several huge beams of light converged on a huge building in the west. The golden lion flag on the building, which was as tall as a building, shone resplendently. At the same time, the beastmen heard a strange sound. Chapter 185. Woo woo woo. The melodious sound of the horn seemed to come from beyond the heavens, or from ancient times. It was desolate and heroic. It reminded people of the world filled with yellow sand, the days when they had to fight against the most ferocious beasts in extremely harsh environments in exchange for a chance of survival for their tribesmen. It was either kill or be killed. The weak had no right to live, and the strong ruled over everything. This was a primitive sound, and it evoked memories hidden in the hearts of countless orcs. How many years had it been since they last heard this sound? Makra. All orcs knew that when a warrior challenged a chief to replace his position, he would use the most sacred duel ritual, Makra. One-on-one. The winner would get everything. Not many people knew that this Makra, which was used to resolve conflicts between orcs and decide who the chief would belong to, could also be used against hostile races. Of course, there was a prerequisite. Chief Blackhand of the Horde. On behalf of our king, King Lang Rin of Stormwind City, who is also the chief in your eyes, I challenge you to Makra. Do you dare to accept the challenge? Duke's voice echoed in the night sky of Stormwind City. No one knew if it was magic or something else, but this shout in orc language was clearly heard by the 100,000 orcs attacking Stormwind City. Great Chieftain Blackhand and Orgrim were walking on the streets of the old Stormwind sector with their bodyguards. Suddenly, their bodies trembled. Makra? Humans actually knew Makra? Almost instantly, Orgrim spat in his heart. It was that lowly traitor Garona who taught him again. Duke's voice continued, Our human king is different from your chief. Our king is not the strongest warrior. That's not important. Our king and our strongest warrior are here. As long as you defeat our strongest warrior, Anduin Lothar in Makra, our king's head will be yours with both hands. We will wait for you at the place where the light pillar is. Blackhand's huge rock-like palm was resting on a thick stone pillar by the side of the road. Almost subconsciously exerting force, the entire stone pillar was easily crushed by the huge strength of his grip. The hard stones exploded like hardened flour, scattering all over the ground. All the orcs' gazes were focused on Blackhand's face. Great Chieftain? Orgrim probed. The muscles on Great Chieftain Blackhand's ugly face kept twitching, and thick veins popped up on his face like a dragon's beard. His eyes were bloodshot due to extreme excitement. Blackhand could feel the fire in his body being pumped out from his heart, spreading to every corner of his body, reaching every cell in his body. Haha. Blackhand laughed maniacally. Beastmen never fear challenges. I don't care what Rai, what Andu. Their heads are mine, all mine. Orgrim immediately understood and shouted to the side, Relay the order of the Great Chieftain. The Great Chieftain has decided to accept the humans, Makra, and forbid any attacks on the humans near the light pillars. The messengers scattered in all directions, and soon, the rough roars of the messengers could be heard everywhere. The great chieftain has accepted the makra. Forbid any attacks on the humans near the light pillars. Let's go! The clouds dispersed, and the moonlight shone on the ground. Together with the light from the torches, the two huge dragon-shaped shoulder ornaments on the great chieftain's shoulders were ghastly pale. On the other side, in the church area of Stormwind City, on the steps of the Stormwind City Cathedral, Ryan sat on a red velvet throne with golden edges on the 9 steps. Anduin and Bolvar stood beside Ryan, one on the left and the other on the right, in their military attire. Will the great chieftain of the Beastmen really come? Bolvar asked Duque for the 3rd time. Enough, Bolvar. Duque's analysis will not be wrong. The Beastman chieftain, who is most obsessed with personal merit, will not let go of such an opportunity. Lang gently stopped his loyal minister. Anduin, who was leaning on his sword, looked even more relaxed. Don't worry, Stormport is not far behind us. The soldiers are all behind us. If the tens of thousands of soldiers are unable to protect our king's safe escape, then we will all commit suicide. Of course, the Beastmen could not find the main force of the humans, because the last 40,000 soldiers and civilians had already gathered quietly near Stormport. There were tens of thousands of people, but they did not make a sound, like a giant beast lurking in the night. Not every soldier knew the arrangements of the higher-ups. They were only informed that there would be special means to arrange for their evacuation. As for what special means, no one knew. Many people stared at the large pile of hay at the port in a daze. The last ship had left in the afternoon. The soldiers scratched their heads and could not figure out how to evacuate. Fortunately, since they had been ordered to bring up the rear, the soldiers were mentally prepared to fight to the death. However, the open space from the church area to the port was really not conducive for humans. Moreover, the soldiers did not have any heavy weapons on hand. If they fought with the Beastmen here, it would be a one-sided massacre. The commander of the Griffin Legion, Tom Simois, who had met Duke once before, still did his best to place the shield-wielding heavy infantry and spearmen against the sea, setting up a formation in the direction of Stormwind City. If the Beastmen rush here, we can at least hold on for a while, General Seamus muttered to himself. When he heard that the plan was proposed by Duque, Seamus did not know why, but he kept thinking of the legendary master of Duque who fought against the Beastmen at the Red Ridge Mountains. That kind of spirit of 1 against 10,000, of taking the head of the enemy's general amidst thousands of men and horses, still deeply shocked his heart. Woo-woo! A long horn sounded in the east of Storm City. Lang, Anduin, and Bolvar all looked up at Duque at the same time. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Duque's mouth. Chief Blackhand has accepted your challenge. Lothar. A smile also appeared on Lothar's enchanting face. He and Lang looked at each other. Lang nodded heavily. Go. Anduin. My life and the future of Stormwind are in your hands. Lothar bowed deeply and then turned to Duque. Sigh, sometimes I really admire you. You have mastered the Orc language and their customs in such a short time. I have learned from that assassin for so long, but I only know a few words in the Orc language. Duque smiled mischievously. I found a large number of Orc books in Karazhan. I have read a lot, I will not lie to you. There were no books about Orcs in Karazhan at all. Duque was completely lying. Lothar did not know. All right, I will rely on you for the translation later. Chapter 186. The once peaceful and tranquil Stormwind City had now become hell. Deer antlers were everywhere, and trenches were everywhere. Almost every sturdy building in the city had been transformed into a bunker with sandbags, gravel, and wood. The soldiers who acted as suicide squads used all sorts of methods to attack the invaders. The javelin throwers hid behind a window on the 3rd floor, continuously shooting at the attacking beastmen. In the Beastman army advancing along the main road, there were beastmen who were shot and fell to the ground. But the Beastman soldiers did not care, and only continued to attack fiercely. Whether it was the human barricades or the bunkers that had been transformed from mansions, the various Beastman clans fought to launch wave after wave of attacks. The green tide flooded one position after another. First was the capital of the Draenei, Shotrath City, then the human Stormwind City. Which city would it be next? The Beastman soldiers did not think too much about it. The sense of pride and glory from conquering the enemy's capital had long made the Beastmen lose their minds. Most of Stormwind City had already fallen into the flames of war, but the human positions were layered like a woman's dress. Every time they tore apart a position, they would see the next one. They did not even have time to plant the clan's flag. A human position that was responsible for providing cover would definitely throw a rain of javelins. That kind of mutual cover, like an endless line of fortifications, gave the attacking Beastman commanders a headache. The bloodletting of the tribes was unknowingly expanding. Just as the battles in every area were extremely fierce, a huge and silent army came straight to the Stormwind City Church District. Over here, with the huge and beautiful Stormwind City Cathedral behind them, nearly 1,000 royal guards stood with swords in hand, waiting in formation. Over there, the great chief Beastman guards, who were more burly than normal Beastmen, with an average height of nearly 3 meters, came forward with Great Chief Blackhand and Orgrim. These elite Beastman guards wore thick black leather armor that covered almost their entire bodies. They wore ferocious shoulder guards that towered into the sky with sharp bone spikes. On their heads were full iron-horned helmets that were meticulously made by the best Beastman laborers. In one hand, they carried a huge battle axe that they had collected from the humans. In the eyes of these humans, the huge battle axe that required 2 hands to lift was just a one-handed axe in the hands of the elite Beastman guards. Lang narrowed his eyes. The green crowd parted to the left and right like a tidal wave. Great Chief Blackhand, who was over 3.5 meters tall, walked forward with Orgrim, who was holding the hammer of destruction. Stepping on the green bricks of the church district, the bricks under the great chief's feet groaned under his heavy weight with every step he took. Blackhand stopped 30 meters away from the stairs. Its eyes that were larger than a bull's eyes scanned the humans from left to right. His gaze easily locked onto King Lang, who was wearing a golden helmet and golden armor and was extremely flashy. "I am the great chief of the tribe, Blackhand. Are you the great chief of the human storm clan?" Blackhand's booming voice shook everyone's eardrums. Naturally, Blackhand spoke in the orc language. Lang, Lothar, and the others all tilted their heads to look at the translator, Duke. "This guy is the orc chieftain Blackhand. He's asking about your identity, your majesty," Duke replied politely. "Tell him," Lang said. Duque bowed slightly and turned to Blackhand. With his left palm facing up, he made an introduction gesture and said in the orc language, "Blackhand. In front of you is the honorable king of Stormwind, Lang Rin. He is a distant descendant of Thoradin the Great, the only human empire from 1,000 years ago. He is now the leader of the alliance of the 7 human kingdoms." Duque's translator had gone off topic on purpose. No one in the tribe knew the human language, and no one in Stormwind City knew the orc language. It was just a matter of a few words from Duque. Duque's tone was no different from the introduction of the ceremonial officer. No one realized that Duque was about to do something bad. Duque then pointed at Lothar. "And this is the direct descendant of Thoradin the Great, the strongest human warrior, Sir Anduin Lothar." Seeing Duque introduce himself, Lothar stood at attention, unsheathed his sword, and held it vertically in front of his chest. Blackhand was a simple-minded guy. He blinked, pointed at Lang, and replied in a booming voice, "You mean, Lang is not only the chieftain of this clan, but also the chieftain of the 7 clans?" Duque quickly repeated Blackhand's words. "Reply to him. Use a more dignified tone," Lang said softly. Duque used a chicken feather as a token of authority. "Blackhand, His Majesty takes pity on your low brain capacity. Well, anyway, you simple-minded guys can't tell the difference between a clan and a kingdom. Suit yourself. If you think His Majesty Lang Rin is the chieftain, that's fine too." Blackhand did not understand what he meant by low brain capacity, but he felt that it was a curse. He was angry. Roar, a terrifying roar with a lung capacity of at least 20,000 milliliters was heard. The fierce roar easily reminded people of a roaring bear. At the same time, Orgrim slammed his hammer on the ground, and a huge tremor once again ravaged everyone's eardrums. Orgrim scolded angrily. "How dare you? A king of a small kingdom that is about to perish has no right to look down on our chieftain." Perish. Shallow people who don't know how vast the world of Azeroth is. Stormwind City is just a kingdom in the south of the Human Alliance. Even if you take down Stormwind City, it will only be equivalent to you destroying a clan. Duque did not back down. The orcs were showing signs of going crazy. Of course, Lothar was not to be outdone. He raised his sword, and all the royal guards put down their shields. The sharp swords were erected in the gap between the shields, like poisonous snakes that were about to spring out. All of a sudden, both sides were at daggers drawn. Blackhand's huge black arm that was petrified blocked in front of Orgrim. "Forget it. Humans. I acknowledge that your king has the qualifications to send someone to challenge me, but the beastmen only accept challenges from the bravest warriors of other races." Blackhand's voice fell, and he didn't even need to give a meaningful glance. An incomparably tall and sturdy personal guard of Blackhand suddenly took 3 steps forward with an axe in hand. "If that Anduin is really the best human warrior, let him prove himself," Orgrim shouted. Duque turned his head. "Hey, Anduin, Blackhand only accepts challenges from the best human warriors. You have to kill that guy first." Lothar tilted his head. "Just one sentence?" Duke retorted. "Could it be that Blackhand despises us, saying that Storm Kingdom is just a small kingdom and we have to translate every sentence?" Lang laughed. "Anduin, don't be so sensitive. Our chief court mage will know what to do. All right, once we get rid of this guy, their great chieftain will fight with me, right?" Chapter 187. Lothar leisurely walked down the stairs. His metal boots stepped on the marble stairs, making a clanking sound. It doesn't feel good to be looked down upon. Did I not kill enough orcs on the battlefield? Lothar mocked himself as he walked. Later, you can hold Blackhand's head and look down on the orcs. Duque was the one who orchestrated all of this. He let Blackhand fight Lothar, who shouldn't be fighting now, but Duque was full of confidence. In the original history, Blackhand died a rather useless death. After Orgrim used torture to get the location of the Shadow Council, Orgrim decisively challenged Makra, under the witness of thousands of orcs. In that duel, Blackhand had the absolute upper hand. The huge rock hand completely ignored Orgrim's hammer and easily beat Orgrim up. However, the cunning Orgrim suddenly made his move. During the duel, he suddenly looked behind Blackhand in shock as if he saw Gul'dan. His mouth also seemed to say, "Gul'dan." Blackhand, who was all brawn and no brains, actually believed it. That moment of distraction immediately gave Orgrim the chance to smash his head with his hammer. The great chief Blackhand might be really powerful, but Blackhand was a brainless child. If Lothar really couldn't beat him, then Lothar's name should be written backwards as Salo Induin. It had nothing to do with the honest, righteous, and heroic young man Duque. Aha! The orc guard charged. Once that huge body charged, it was no different from a charging rhinoceros. That kind of terrifying pressure would make a timid person pee in their pants. Close, even closer. The huge double-edged battle axe suddenly chopped down. Under the moonlight, it created a cold arc. It was a terrifying force that could split a grown man, along with his shield, into 2 halves from head to toe. However, Lothar used a Marseille spin. Forgive Duque for using a football term to describe Lothar. However, after seeing through the enemy's simple and brutal attack route, Lothar instantly made a gorgeous turn. This action reminded Duque of Zidane. It was equally dashing and full of artistic beauty. Noxus turned around with his left leg as a fulcrum and easily dodged the thunderous axe strike. He then held his sword in a reverse grip and gently pushed it forward as if he was playing with a sword. The sharp king's sword pierced through the gap between the orc guard's helmet and armor as he turned slightly to the right. Blood splattered everywhere. The blade of the sword pierced through the orc guard's jaw without any resistance and went straight through his brain. Until the moment of his death, the orc's eyes were still filled with confusion and shock. Lothar's long hair, which was fluttering due to the rapid rotation, lay meekly on his shoulder under the effect of gravity. He easily killed the enemy, and his hair was not messed up. Handsome. So cool. Furthermore, it was an instant kill. He gently pulled out his sword and let the dead orc's huge body fall with a loud bang. Blood spurted out from behind him. Noxus swung his sword and the dirty blood beads fell on the floor tiles. Lothar walked slowly toward Blackhand. One step, another, and another. With every step he took, his unparalleled domineering aura became stronger. Esiths. The orcs gasped in unison. They had the same thought. This guy is indeed worthy of being the best human warrior. Ha! The chief Blackhand let out a burst of hearty laughter. He was not the slightest bit angry because of the death of his guard. Instead, Lothar's gorgeous steps attracted his attention. Pushing aside the guards in front of him, Blackhand strode forward proudly. Ha! Not bad. You're not bad. Indeed, you're qualified to challenge me. Duque's translator said, Andoin, this arrogant guy has agreed to fight you. Lothar stood 10 meters away from Blackhand and smiled. Duque, tell this guy to smile more while he can. I don't want him to still have that ugly smile on his face when I cut off his head. Duque translated. Blackhand didn't care at all. Mocking each other before the battle started was definitely a part of the duel. Tell this human warrior that as long as it's a warrior's head, I will preserve it well. Before Duque could translate, Lothar had already cursed, You can deal with the harsh words yourself. God knows if he'll think that I'm going to kiss his shoes if I call him a coward. Orcs don't wear shoes. Duque shrugged. Lothar rolled his eyes at Duque. Duque said helplessly, All right. Blackhand, we humans are much more civilized than you. Lothar said that he'll cut off your head and seal it in ice to ensure that it's fresh and intact. If any humans knew that Duque had translated it like that, they would definitely complain, How civilized can that be? However, the orcs did not care. Perhaps, it was the strong enemy killed by Macra that had the value of preserving the enemy's head. At this time, Orgrim held the Blackrock clan's flag with one hand and strode forward, handing it to Blackhand. The great chief seemed to casually throw the flag on the ground. He looked straight at Lothar, then at Duque. Duque understood. Your Majesty, the orcs throwing the flag means that they're sacrificing the glory of the entire clan. For the duel to stand, we have to do the same. Lang nodded. A flag-bearer behind him walked down the stairs with his chest puffed out. He handed the golden lion flag with a blue background and golden edges to Lothar, who had sheathed his sword. Lothar took the flag and threw it out as well. It happened to be on top of the Blackrock clan's flag. Of course, the orcs did not realize Lothar's intentions. Macra. Orgrim raised his arms and shouted. His voice was like thunder. Orgrim's roar was followed by hundreds of thousands of orcs. In an instant, thousands of orcs shouted in unison, Macra, Hugh, 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 Hugh. Every orc raised and put down their weapons, making a primal and heroic sound. Of course, Stormwind would not back down. King Lang stood up resolutely. He held his shield in his left hand and slammed the king's sword on the shield. Bang, 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 bang. Thousands of royal guards did the same action. Cold light flashed. Every lion emblem on the shield looked like a ferocious lion roaring. The warriors of Stormwind used this method to create an aura that was not any weaker than the hordes. In the air, it was as if thousands of swords and axes were clashing fiercely. Invisible sword shadows filled every corner of the night sky. Come, Lothar drew his sword again. Under the strong night wind, his hair fluttered in the wind. From afar, Lothar's hair looked like a lion's mane. Ha! The great tribal chief strode toward Lothar with heavy steps that shook the heavens and earth. Chapter 188. If the orc guards were like rampaging rhinoceroses, then Blackhand's attack was like a speeding heavy tank. His violent and unstoppable aura had shaken the 4 digits of human warriors on the scene. The great chief Blackhand, who was nearly 3.5 meters tall, was a giant among both humans and orcs. Some people might think that a giant like Blackhand would be slow in his movements. In fact, any enemy or challenger who had this thought would have their heads crushed by Blackhand. High strength meant slow speed, and high speed meant low strength. This formula didn't apply to Blackhand. Not only was Blackhand fast and strong, but he also had an advantage that no one else had. His weapons were his hands. People often said that a person wielding a sword was like an extension of his arm, and that was a very high level of mastery. However, no matter how agile a weapon was, it was impossible for it to be more agile than one's own hands. Blackhand had an advantage. Back then, when he helped Orgrim pull Doomhammer out of the lava, he almost lost both his arms. Not many people could withstand the blazing heat, and there was a shocking amount of fire elements. If it was an ordinary person's arm, it would have been charred into charcoal and broken in the lava. However, Blackhand's willpower, strength, muscles, and natural resistance to fire were all extremely powerful, and he managed to withstand the inferno at the mouth of the volcano. A large amount of fire elements attached to his arms and palms, which not only destroyed more than half of Blackhand's hand nerves, but also completely turned his skin and muscles below his arms into rock. That pair of heavy and shiny black hands had a strange luster that was between stone and metal. Although every joint below his arms could move flexibly, it was obviously beyond the realm of a living creature. If someone was stupid enough to chop off Blackhand's arms, the last thing that would fall off would be his head. Of course, Noxus wouldn't fall for it. Duque had repeatedly reminded him that if Noxus fell for it, then he wouldn't be Noxus, but an idiot. Noxus also dashed toward Blackhand with small steps. In the next second, a strong gust of wind rose from the ground. Before Blackhand made his move, no one would have thought that this great tribal chief's left arm's casual grab, such a simple sweep, would possess such terrifying might. It was an earth-shattering feeling that should only appear when the entire building collapsed. Just that gust of wind alone was enough to crush every inch of muscles on a person's face, teeth, and other bones. He couldn't even open his eyes, let alone see what was in front of him. For a moment, Duque had the illusion that Lothar had been killed without any suspense. It was too scary. That was a power and speed that the poor human imagination could not comprehend. That feeling was as if the other party had picked up a church door and slammed it down horizontally, turning you into minced meat. The last sentence that remained in your mind was impossible. Fortunately, Duque's rationality dispelled his hallucinations. If he had really made a move just now, he would have disrupted this incomparably sacred duel in the eyes of the beastmen. That would truly be a disaster. Lothar dodged and pounced like a ferocious tiger, then rolled forward on the ground to the right, avoiding the great chieftain's ferocious left-hand sweep. Not only that, but Noxus also used the blade of the king's sword to pull Blackhand's thigh that was as thick as a bull's thigh. Blood splattered. A long bloodstain appeared on the great chieftain's left thigh. Blackhand's leg armor did not play any role at all, as if the precious leather armor was just a thin piece of paper that could be torn to shreds. But this was not the end. Blackhand actually swung his right fist, turned around like a whirlwind, and suddenly punched down from the top right to the bottom left. There was a loud sound that was close to a sonic boom in the pitch-black sky. The fist that came crashing down was not like a giant stone object at all, but more like a blazing ball of lava. The release of fire elements that was equivalent to a mage throwing a fireball? How was this possible? Obviously, within a certain range, Blackhand had the power to control the fire elements. His domination level was quite high, even higher than the Sky Mage Duque. Duque's heart froze in an instant. If it wasn't Kilrog Deadeye, Orgrim, and Samuro who surrounded him when he went to set the fire a while ago, but Blackhand. If he was tricked by him, perhaps he would really have to run for his life. The temperature was comparable to that of lava. The power to kill with a single touch. Either of these 2 points would result in death. Every human warrior forgot to breathe as they stared at Lothar's incomparably small figure in front of Blackhand. However, Lothar still managed to dodge it. It was a strange movement that was a little like a spring bouncing back. He slammed the shield on the ground with his left hand, and used the recoil force of his arm to bounce off the ground. Lothar's entire body actually rose into the air, and he barely dodged the fist's edge like he was juggling. With a loud tearing sound, the armor under Lothar's left rib was grazed, and the entire piece of armor that was at least 5 millimeters thick was torn off. It was even easier than tearing bread with his hands. A 1-meter-wide pit of flames suddenly appeared on the ground. SSS. Lang stood up in shock. Every human warrior broke out in a cold sweat for Lothar. Only Lothar stood up and curled his lips nonchalantly, as if the guy who almost died just now was not him. I'm liking your head more and more. Endoin. Black Hand laughed maniacally while ignoring the wound on his thigh, and continued to attack Lothar fiercely. Duque translated. Me too, Lothar said while dodging in a flustered manner. He was clearly a warrior, but it was as if he had activated the bandit's special skill, evasion. He had a 100% dodge rate. Duque translated again. Let's fight each other. The speed of Black Hand's hand that had turned into rock suddenly increased greatly again. It was almost as fast as the Sword Sage's blade storm. However, Black Hand still couldn't deal any effective damage. It was impossible for Lothar to dodge every attack. However, as he took quick and accurate steps, he danced the epic-ranked shield on his left arm. His agile footwork, ingenious angle deflection, accurate unloading, and perfect use of various warrior skills allowed Lothar to be on par with Black Hand. No, that's not right. Because Black Hand's attacks were more extensive, Lothar's ghostly attacks left more than 10 wounds of varying depths on Black Hand. Following Black Hand's intense movements, every wound on his body was bleeding. He's bleeding. For a while, Black Hand could rely on his tyrannical body to hold on, but as time passed, the scales of victory would definitely tip in Lothar's favor. That was provided that Lothar didn't get hit by a heavy blow. That was the difference in size. Black Hand, who had stronger vitality, had many opportunities to make mistakes, but once Lothar made a mistake, he would be killed instantly. Chapter 189. The boorish roars of the orcs and the uniform sound of the humans hitting their shields echoed throughout Stormwind City. Everyone worshipped heroes. Even in a large-scale battle where individual strength was becoming weaker and weaker, this bloody and heroic battle still stimulated the adrenal glands of every spectator, causing them to secrete a substance called fanaticism. Only the true masters could see that the scales of victory were still slowly tilting towards the humans. Orgrim was anxious. The great chief, Black Hand, must die, but not by the hands of a human. In a one-on-one duel to the death, how could the valiant orc chief die in the hands of a weak human? That would be a humiliation for all orcs in the tribe. Even if one day the orcs conquered the entire planet of Azeroth, they would still be nailed to the pillar of shame, and this humiliation would be passed down. Even though he wanted Black Hand to die, Orgrim knew very well that at this moment, he and Black Hand had the same interests. Suddenly, the great chief unleashed his ultimate move. With a flip of his hand, he grabbed the 2 intact dragon skeletons that looked like crocodiles on his shoulder. The next moment, Black Hand threw the 2 skeletons out. In less than 1/100th of a second, the skeletons that were made up of hundreds of joints exploded. In the blink of an eye, they turned into hundreds of fragmentation bombs that contained blazing fire elements and shot towards Lothar. Lothar originally had the chance to dodge, but at this moment, Orgrim cheated. Good. It sounded like Orgrim's adjutant was cheering for his boss. Why did he have to use the lion's roar to intimidate others? This was a warrior's fear-breaking roar. The earth-shattering roar was at least 150 decibels, and it clearly affected Lothar. Lothar's entire body trembled, and in that moment, Lothar lost the chance to dodge. It couldn't be helped at all. Even an experienced veteran like Noxus couldn't come up with a good remedy in a situation where he had lost the initiative. Lothar gave up on dodging, knelt down on one knee, and took the hit with his shield. Tut-tut-tut. The barrage of attacks that were comparable to machine gun fire almost completely blew up Lothar's shield. After a round of skeletons of fire swept past, Lothar's shield became tattered, and light could be seen in several places. Fortunately, Lothar himself was not injured. The consequences were severe. Noxus had completely lost the skill, block. What are you doing? Lang, Bolvar, and a few other high-ranking generals let out similar angry shouts. After Duque translated, Orgrim sneered, "I did not interfere." If a true warrior can't even withstand the cheers of the enemy, then he might as well die. His words almost drove Lang and the others crazy. At this time, Duque suddenly showed the same sneer. You mean to say that using words and sound to affect the enemies in the arena is not considered cheating? Orgrim did not speak, which was undoubtedly a tacit agreement. On the other side, Lothar was in a desperate situation. In terms of absolute strength and speed, Blackhand was superior to Noxus. Having lost his shield and unable to dodge, Lothar could only use his longsword to parry Blackhand's attack. For Blackhand's hands that were comparable to heavy hammers, a longsword like a light weapon was at a disadvantage. Unless it was psychic, a longsword could never be more agile than one's own hands. In the last incident where Medivh was killed, the king's sword had used up a lot of power. Lothar calculated and could not use the power of the sword to chop off Blackhand's claws. Lothar's face was cold. Lang, Bolvar, and the others trembled all over. Lang almost wanted to shed all pretense of cordiality and let his subordinates do it. But in the end, they still focused their attention on Duque. "Watch me throw the cup as a signal." That was what Duque said. Once again, Blackhand forced Lothar into a corner. It was a corner of the square, with towering marble walls on both sides. There was no way to dodge at all. "Anduin Lothar, I will remember your name. But go to hell." The great chief let out a roar of victory. At this second, the cheers of the orcs reached their peak. The blazing cheers almost overturned the clouds in the sky. They shouted the greatness of the great chief and praised Blackhand's bravery. As long as the number one human warrior was killed, the human great chief's head would be at their fingertips. This symbolized that the invincible orcs had once again conquered the weak foreign races. Supreme glory! The best, Macra! In the next moment, the great chief's hands would shoot out like lightning with blazing heat and the whistle of death. That would be the death of Lothar. Macra's failure. The entire Stormwind and the possible future failure of the Alliance. Without Lothar, there would be no such thing as a descendant of great Emperor Saladin, and it was still a question whether the Seven Kingdoms would still be united. At this moment, even Lothar's handsome face lost all color. Every human watching the battle clenched their fists. At this critical moment, Duque's light words entered the ears of the great chief. "If I tell you that the Shadow Council sent someone to kill Orgrim's good friend, Durotan, and that Orgrim is plotting to overthrow you, the great chieftain, and that as long as you find out the location of the Shadow Council from Garona, who he captured, he'll kill you and wipe out the Shadow Council that killed his good friend, what would you think, great chief?" At this critical moment, Duque would not have said such a long sentence. But Duque finished his sentence in an instant. This was a technique that Pharaoh specialized in, repetition of incantations. Extract all the important syllables from a long sentence and compress them into one, making a long incantation into a short paragraph. Of course, the sound produced was equivalent to pressing dozens of keys on a piano at the same time. With human hearing, it was impossible to distinguish this noise. And most repetition of incantations only reduced a 3-second incantation to 1 second. This was already very impressive. Duque had the system elf. This greatest king system could make the impossible possible. A long paragraph was forcibly compressed into a single note. However, as the receiver, Great Chief Blackhand heard every word clearly. As Gul Dan's hardcore as a puppet among puppets, he was a model example of someone who would help others pay for using him. The Great Chief was furious and suddenly turned his head to look at Ogrim. Ogrim! Lothar did not know why Blackhand was in a daze, but it did not stop Lothar from sliding between Blackhand's legs and slashing at the forked part of Blackhand's thigh. There was a kind of pain in the world called pain in the balls, also known as the most painful pain for men. Blackhand could not control his body at all and bent over in pain. In the next second, seeing that there was no time to lose, Lothar beautifully pierced through Blackhand's chest from behind. The dignified king's sword was once again used as a backstab, the sharp blade piercing through Blackhand's chest. But Blackhand did not care. He pointed at Ogrim and let out the last roar of his life, "You traitor!" Chapter 190. Time was completely frozen. Just a moment ago, the great chief was still having a smooth journey. Countless beastmen were cheering for the great chief's victory. The enthusiastic cheers almost shot up into the starry sky. On the other hand, everyone on the human side was sweating profusely. They couldn't wait to attack and kill the monstrous great chief who was about to kill their great hero, Anduin Lothar, on the spot. The next moment, the plot took a 180-degree turn. Lothar, who was supposed to be killed, miraculously turned the tables. First, he taught Blackhand a lesson with a sword that hurt to see, then followed up with a beautiful backstab. Everyone could see that the great chief was about to die. In this duel, Lothar had the last laugh. A few seconds later, the beastmen who seemed to have been choked by the neck suddenly became even more restless. No, this was no longer a restless, this was a complete riot. At first, none of the beastmen could accept the great chief's death. Why did the great and invincible great chieftain die at the hands of a weak human? Even if this human looked very agile, courageous, and heroic. Because of their blind worship of the great chief, none of the beastmen could accept it. However, the great chief's roar before his death gave all the beastmen a reason. The two sentences added up to, "Orgrim, you traitor." Traitor? Why would Orgrim, who was so loyal to the great chief, become a traitor? Did Orgrim do something to the great chief? The beastmen's simple thinking circuits could not wrap their heads around it. But that was not important. Deity played the role of a facilitator. In the houses on both sides of the beastmen's gathering, someone suddenly shouted in beastman language, "We are the Shadow Destroyers." At least a third of the beastmen present were stunned for a full second. When they came back to their senses, they immediately swung their axes and machetes at the Blackrock warriors beside them, especially Blackhand's personal guards. At the same time, a huge flaming cup appeared in Deity's hand. Deity threw the huge cup at the place where Blackhand's personal guards were the most concentrated. Immediately, a series of tragic cries rang out. King Lang and Bolivar were the most embarrassed. In any case, their expressions could be translated as, "Damn it, is this really a sign to throw a cup?" Nothing else mattered. What mattered was that Deity had sent a signal. In the surrounding rooms, nearly 100 people shouted in the orc language, "Avenge Durotan." Along with this shout, dozens of Frostwolf clan flags were raised in the houses next to them. At this moment, all the beastmen warriors of the Blackstone tribe who were still in a daze just a moment ago understood. Why did the great chief lose? This must be Orgrim's doing. Everyone knew that Orgrim and the Frostwolf tribe's chieftain Durotan were sworn brothers who had gone through fire and water together. However, after passing through the door of darkness and arriving in this world, Durotan was exiled by his entire tribe because he opposed Ghoul Den. From the looks of it, Durotan should be dead. This would explain why Orgrim would betray the great chief. It was because Orgrim wanted to take revenge for his best friend. Therefore, the warriors of the Blackrock clan were enraged. "Orgrim, you traitor! Have you forgotten the great chief's kindness? Orgrim, have you forgotten that the great chief sacrificed his own hands to help you fish up Doomhammer? Orgrim, you are not worthy of being a great beast man. Orgrim, you actually colluded with the humans to murder the great chief." The angry roar reached the sky, and it could be heard clearly from a few blocks away. This time, not only the Blackrock clan, but even the other clans who were looting and burning heard it. Orgrim was completely dumbfounded. His mind was filled with question marks. The matter of rebellion was an absolute secret. How did the humans know about the slogan of treason? How did the humans know that I betrayed because of Durotan's death? What method did the humans use to make the great chief think that he was the traitor in a duel? Orgrim's thoughts were in a mess. He was indeed prepared to rebel, but it was a beastman uprising. As long as he killed the Black Hand in the sacred Makra, no matter how dissatisfied the other clans were, Orgrim would still be a legal rebel. As long as he became the great chief, he could reasonably accuse Ghoul Dan of using demonic methods to poison the beastmen and wipe out the Shadow Council. The secret code of "We are the Shadow Destroyers" was only used after he became the great chief to suppress any Blackrock clan beastmen who disobeyed his orders. However, everything was a mess now. The great chief died under the swords of the humans in Makra because of his betrayal. His subordinates also decisively attacked the Black Hand's personal guards because of the secret code. The Frostwolf clan's flag pushed him and his subordinates to the opposite side of the entire clan. What is going on? Orgrim only felt that there was an invisible evil hand hiding behind him and viciously attacking him. Even if it wasn't sh*t, it would still be sh*t. There was no way he could explain it clearly. At this time, Duque shouted righteously in the Beastman language, "I don't know what the hell you Beastmen are doing, but the winner of Makra is our Anduin Lothar." It would have been better if Duque did not shout, but once he did, Orgrim actually felt a telepathic connection. This was an intuition that surpassed his rationality. Orgrim instinctively felt that this powerful and sinister young human mage, Duque, was the culprit of everything. Duque stopped him from attacking Storm Fortress. Duque burned down half of the elven forest, forcing the horde to split up their forces. It was this Duke again, the mastermind behind this strange Makra, from the beginning to the end. "Of course you have to remember me, because I will become your nightmare." Duque's words echoed in Orgrim's ears. Looking at the mysterious smile on Duque's face, Orgrim was certain that everything was King Duque's doing. Duke Marcus. Orgrim finally remembered Duque's name. As an old enemy. Using hatred as a mark. But so what? Orgrim raised Hammer of Destruction and wanted to rush forward, but he realized that he was being attacked by two highly skilled Black Hand's personal guard captains. He would not be able to rush forward until he got rid of them. On the other side, Noxus had successfully cut off Black Hand's giant head. He held the head in one hand and rushed over with his sword in the other. Bolvar covered Lang and quickly retreated to Storm Harbor. Noxus' face was filled with endless joy. Did it work? Let's go. Chapter 191. Everyone at the scene knew the weight of the great chief's head in Lothar's hands. If King Lang had been defeated in the capital and fled to South Shore, no matter how many soldiers he had saved and how many people he had protected, Lang would still be a useless king in the eyes of the other 6 kings. This humiliation would follow Lang for the rest of his life, and it would even affect the young William. In the history, even if Lang had been assassinated, he was still the king who defended the country and the hero in the hearts of the people. Even if Lothar and William were despised everywhere, no one would blame Lang for his death. In this life, Lang had survived thanks to Duque's efforts. Since Duque had protected Lang from Garona's assassination, he would not let Lang die in battle for the sake of his reputation in Stormwind City. After Lang died, Stormwind lost its backbone. Now, the situation was completely different. The Great Chief's head and the tribal Great Chief's battle flag that Lothar had asked the guards to pick up were enough to prove that Lang had been defeated with honor. The battle flag, which was decorated with the teeth of large beasts, was obviously different. Even if they had lost the capital, every Stormwind citizen could still go out and say to anyone, "Our great hero, Lothar, chopped off the tribal Great Chief's head." However, everything was orchestrated by Duque. Without Duque's orc connection, no one would have thought of using such a method to lure the Great Chief out. Even the most picky person could only give Duque a thumbs up. Lothar was indeed a hero, as he was able to kill the Great Chief, Black Hand, despite the huge disparity in strength and speed. Everyone knew that Duque was the real hero. "Give me the head." Duque waved his hand. Lothar tossed Black Hand's head to Duque as he ran. "Chilling cold." Duque waved his hand, and an extremely cold aura instantly enveloped the head of the great tribal chief, who was spinning in midair. In the next moment, Magician's hand caught Black Hand's head, which was frozen in a transparent block of ice. The heavy work of moving the enemy leader's head was naturally done by the guards. "Take the head and the flag and leave first. I'll bring the first squad to cover our retreat." Lothar did not let down his guard. He put on a shield and led the troops to retreat cautiously. In fact, Noxus was worrying too much. The orcs were already fighting amongst themselves, and didn't have the time to pay attention to the retreating humans. At the dock, General Tom Seamus was burning with anxiety. When he saw Lang's war flag and the royal guards at the city gate of Storm Harbor, he hurriedly led his troops to meet them. "Your Majesty, your safety is more important than anything else." General Seamus was so emotional that he was about to cry. "You've worked hard, my dear subject. Now, only the last 2 steps are left." Lang stared at the squad of guards who were carrying the great tribal chief's head and the tribe's war flag, with obvious excitement in his eyes. Killing the commander and capturing the flag. If it weren't for Duque, he probably would have died here, wouldn't he? Infinite gratitude for Duque surged in Lang's chest. Thinking of the nobles who fled with their family properties at the time of disaster, Duque's name had already become sacred in Lang's heart. On the other side, when the troops led by Lothar were almost out of the church square, Duque finally launched a backup plan. Ambrose Liza Magarov's. It was a long incantation. As Duque's incantation sounded, Lothar clearly sensed that something was changing in the air. Countless mysterious magic runes appeared under Duque's feet like ripples, spreading in all directions. Seeing that Duque had stopped chanting and the magic waves around him had also calmed down, Lothar still couldn't help but ask, "What did you do? If you wanted to burn down Storm City, would you need such an exaggerated magic array?" Duque smiled mysteriously, "You will know soon." At the same time, the Blackstone clan orcs who were fighting each other felt a wave of fear in their hearts. It was purely an animal's instinct, just like how even a mouse would run away in the face of a disaster. At this moment, every orc in all the streets of Storm City, no matter what they were doing, forcibly stopped what they were doing. The ground under their feet made them tremble in fear. In the largest church in Storm City, accompanied by the ringing of the bell, every evening prayer hall would echo with the uniform sound of the priest's evening prayers night after night. Following the attack on Storm City, the bell for evening prayers had not been rung for a long time. Every priest was using holy healing spells to heal the injured, using their kind voices to comfort every frightened soul. However, at this moment, the church bell that had not been rung in the night for a long time rang, 3 short, 3 long, another 3 short. This was the signal that they had agreed on. The members of the Daredevils who had long given up hope of escaping and knew that they were going to die quickly moved. They might have crawled out of an abandoned attic, an inconspicuous closet, or a secret basement, dragging their broken bodies with all their might. They used flint stones to light torches and threw them on the things that had been prepared beforehand. Some of them were piles of firewood that had already been doused with oil, some were piles of whale fat that had been piled up in the corner, and some were storerooms filled with dry straw. More importantly, in the hot summer, the brick and wood houses and the large amount of flammables that had been prepared beforehand made it very easy to start a fire. Storage banks, exchanges, residences, shops, mansions of the nobles, various government offices, hotels, and all the important and unimportant facilities, more than 1,000 fires were lit up. In the beginning, the orcs who had already dispersed did not care about the fire. Burning, killing, and looting were absolutely common for any big city that had fallen. A few years ago, when the orcs had taken over Shotrath City, they had done the same thing to the Dreenii City. And the orcs were not interested in human houses at all. They preferred their own tents. The orcs did not even think of running out to take a look, let alone putting out the fire. But soon they found that they were wrong. The fire was out of control. A fear that they had experienced not long ago surged in their hearts again. They suddenly remembered the scene of Duque burning down most of the tribe's main camp by himself. That blazing fire, which could be called the flames of hell, caused the deaths of over 10,000 orcs. They began to run out, trying to use all kinds of methods to put out the fire, but it was too late. The fire had already spread and scrupulously everywhere. One block after another was easily swallowed by the raging fire. In the narrow streets, they could not find a place to hide from the fire. They could only run to the wide square or jump into the moat that covered the whole of Storm City. They watched in shock as pillars of fire shot into the sky one after another. Chapter 192. The area of fire grew wider and wider. Looking down from the black sky, one would find that the entire city seemed to have been flooded. It was a torrent of raging flames. Beep beep blah. Low houses, towering mansions, huge warehouses, and countless other houses that had been burned through collapsed one after another. Along with the continuous rumbling, countless orcs who could not dodge in time were crushed to death by the brick and wood houses in the narrow streets. Fire. The streets and main roads had already been sealed off by the raging flames. At almost every important intersection, there were two large houses that had collapsed. The enormous burning towers just happened to block every path of escape. The orcs who had already hidden in the safe zone were trembling in fear, cold sweat dripping down their backs. They could only watch as their compatriots were devoured by the flames. Even if they covered their ears, they could still hear the screams and cries of their brethren as they burned the city. There was also the wild laughter of the human suicide squad before they lost their lives. Haha. There was no regret, only the wild laughter of an enemy being killed. At that moment, the orcs realized that they had fallen into a common nightmare. That nightmare was named Duke Marcus. Once again he burned countless orcs to death with his flames. Orgrim also jumped into the city's canal. Even though it was a hot summer day, the river water was still warm, but it did nothing to raise the temperature in his heart. This was an extremely painful trap for him, and he lost more than half of his men. If it weren't for the fire, perhaps even the remaining half of his body would have been killed by the crazy counterattack of the Black Hand Guards. He could no longer remember how many Black Hand Guards he had killed with his Hammer of Destruction. It was once a weapon that he was immensely proud of. He had used it to slay countless ogres and over 100 ferocious beasts in our world. But now, under the moonlight, the blood on the Hammer of Destruction flowed along the water of the canal. It was the blood of the Blackrock tribe, the blood of his fellow beastmen. However, Orgrim still had a strong sense of doubt and ominous premonition. He had a feeling that Duke Marcus, who was more devilish than the devil, had more tricks up his sleeves. Unknowingly, the moon was shrouded in dark clouds again. In the shining river, they saw a series of golden runes extending to the riverside like flames. That's impossible. Orgrim couldn't help but scream, "Get to the shore! Quick, otherwise it will be too late." Orgrim frantically called out to his men, his brethren. His subordinates obeyed. Even if they were a little unwilling, they still climbed up to the shore. Not far from the bluestone path along the riverbank was the city wall that had been roasted by the blazing Flame Street district until even the bricks had turned red. These 3-meter-high low walls, together with canals that could act as moats when necessary, divided Stormwind City into 6 large districts. Even though they were sitting on the bluestone by the riverbank, they could still feel the extreme heat. If it wasn't for Orgrim's roar, they would have sunk back into the cool water. In fact, many beastmen who were not directly under Orgrim had done so. They returned to the river, and crossed the boundary between hell and the human world that the Grim Reaper had drawn with his scythe. It was as if there was a blazing sun rising from the depths of Stormwind City, arching the earth as if it would break through at any time. Countless golden runes glowed from the black soil beneath the canals. The beastmen in the river could clearly see their toes from the surface of the water. Rumble the entire Stormwind City shook. From King's Valley in the south to Stormwind Fort in the north, from the Mage District in the west to the Old City in the east, every street was shaking. The statue of Medivh that stood in the middle of King's Valley began to shake violently. Then, the statue that symbolized the guardian of the old era began to crumble. Every brick on the ground, along with the sand under them, rose and fell like waves, becoming more and more turbulent. Even the beastmen who were hiding from the flames on the ground were thrown into the air, dropped down, and then thrown up again. The wooden beams and pillars that were already starting to burn in the flames creaked and exploded one after another, speeding up the collapse of every house that had yet to collapse. Then, the golden light shot out of the ground and into the bottom of the river. The streets and roads that were originally without flames became roads of flames. Every drop of water in the canals that were supposed to be shelters evaporated due to the high temperature. The beastmen who were still in the river were scalded to death in a few blinks of an eye. And the water turned into steam. The hot steam was even more lethal than the flames. The orcs couldn't suppress their breathing, so they inhaled a large amount of hot steam. The steam destroyed the alveoli in their lungs, making them feel like they weren't breathing air, but fire. Even the beastmen who climbed up to the riverbank could not escape the fate of death. They only lingered on for a little longer than their brethren in the river, and then followed in the footsteps of their brethren. All the beastmen in Stormwind City screamed in agony, and then everything returned to silence. In the city, there was only the crackling of the raging flames, and the crackling of pillars, bricks, and glass falling to the ground. Other than that, the entire city fell into a deathly silence. How many beastmen could survive? Not 1 in 100. The beastmen who ran out of the streets or jumped into the river were almost completely wiped out. Only a small number of beastmen who were trapped in the fire managed to escape the scythe of the death god. Orgrim did not die. With his high fire resistance, he managed to withstand the flames, but a lot of his hair was burned off. Climbing out of the fire that was no longer as hot, Orgrim saw the charred corpses that filled the streets and riverbed. Duke Marcus. He had never hated a person as much as he did now. Even when he received news of his best friend Durotan's death, Orgrim still controlled his emotions. But this time, only this time, Orgrim completely hated a human. He was the new guardian of Stormwind, Duque. I will kill you. I swear, even if I have to chase you to the ends of hell, I will kill you. I will peel off every piece of your flesh. I will eat you alive. I will break every single bone in your body and crush them. I will. On the scorched ground, Orgrim knelt down dejectedly. It's over. The elites of the Blackrock clan were all burned to ashes. Even if there were still many Blackrock tribe members in the camp, they would no longer be the strongest tribe in the Horde. Chapter 193. In Stormwind Port, separated by a city wall, tens of thousands of Stormwind Kingdom's elite soldiers witnessed the last scene of their beloved city. Flames rose from the ground and soared into the sky. The flames could be clearly seen from dozens of kilometers away. The fire lit up the entire night sky. Perhaps, from today onwards, Stormwind City would be known as Flame City. Lang couldn't help but ask as he watched Duque return under the escort of Lothar and his elite soldiers. This was definitely not something that could be achieved by ordinary arson. If he had to use a word to describe it, it would be purgatory. Duque wiped the sweat off his forehead with the towel that Windsor handed him. This is the magical defense system that Medivh left behind. His original plan was to set up a magical formation similar to the firewall spell in every canal. This was to prevent enemies from invading and destroying all the streets at once. But I changed it a little. Of course, Lang knew about the division of the different districts. Why were there canals and walls separating the districts of Stormwind City? It was so that they could resist. In fact, there were secret tunnels between the districts so that even if parts of the districts were conquered, they could still use the secret tunnels to take back territory. Yes, I ordered the Suicide Squad to set the entire city on fire and block the streets to drive all the orcs into the rivers. Then, Duque didn't finish his sentence. Everyone present was smart. They immediately realized that this was a chain reaction. By driving the orcs away, they would gather them together and then exploit the enemy's psychological blind spots to turn the safest place into a real death zone. No one would have thought that the canals that could avoid being burned to death were the real killer moves. Suddenly, everyone felt lucky that Duque was one of them. Killing the great chief of the Horde and burning 100,000 of the Horde's soldiers with a fire. This glorious achievement easily made the soldiers cheer. The cheers didn't last long. It was simple. Everyone's heart was still heavy. Tens of thousands of soldiers gathered at the Stormwind Port. The huge square of the port became extremely crowded because there were as many as 50,000 people. In order to avoid being outflanked by the Horde, the goblins had detonated the explosives on the cliff closest to Storm Harbor. However, once the fire was extinguished, if the Horde attacked again, these 50,000 people would have nowhere to run. These were not ordinary recruits. Perhaps many of them were from the militia or local garrisons. The real regular army only made up about 60% of them. But they had one thing in common. These 50,000 people were all veterans who had experienced more than one war with the orcs. It was not an exaggeration to say that these 50,000 people were the essence of Stormwind. If these 50,000 people could evacuate safely, Lothar was confident that he could train an army of 200,000 people within a year with these 50,000 people as seeds. If all 50,000 people died here, Lothar was right to be worried. In history, Lothar fled in panic with only the queen and Prince Rin, an orphan and a widow, and thousands of soldiers. As a result, they were under the control of other human kingdoms. But tonight, the so-called history had changed beyond recognition. Lothar combed his sweaty hair and patted Duque on the shoulder. "All right, now it's time for you to perform." The 50,000 soldiers silently parted to the left and right like the tide, each of them in awe. The person who strode in front of them was the hero Duque. Many people felt that this excessively young man was a mystery. In just a year, he had risen rapidly and become an important minister in the kingdom. Not only did he have powerful magic power, unparalleled courage, and the wisdom of a top tactician. From taking in the Murloc Naga to expand the Pearl Sea route for Stormwind City, to raiding Karazhan and killing Sargeras, to setting fire to the Horde's army, and finally to burning the city. The name Duke Marcus had become a legend. Now, everyone was shocked when they thought that they were about to become a part of this unfinished legend. No one knew what Duque was going to do next, but everyone felt that Duque could do it. This was the sense of trust that was based on actual achievements. Duque had proven himself time and time again. Now, it was just another step in Duque's legend to climb to new heights. Under thousands of gazes, Duque walked onto the dock and towards the dark sea. On the sea, the wind was strong and the waves were strong. The only thing that could be confirmed was that there were no ships on the sea, not even a sampan. Duque had personally promised every high-ranking official of Stormwind City that he would evacuate these 50,000 soldiers safely. How would he evacuate? Is Great Wizard Duque going to open the portal? A knight with some knowledge asked his colleague in a low voice. Impossible. I've seen the wizard's portal. I heard that it's very unstable, and even the sky wizards can't teleport more than 10 people at once, another knight replied. It's not a portal. This time, it was General Tom Simois who spoke. Even the dark portal that attracted the orcs this time can't teleport more than 500 people at once. Not to mention 50,000 people. Unknowingly, Duque had already walked to the end of the dock. Amidst many people's exclamations, Duque seemed to have lost his footing and fallen into the sea from the stone dock. But the next step, Duque stepped on solid ground. It was actually ice. Incomparably cold air instantly spread from under Duque's feet, and in the blink of an eye, a large area was frozen. The huge waves that were rushing towards him froze in front of Duque. The surging seawater lost all its momentum, and quietly and obediently crawled in front of Duque, in a frozen state. The large area of the sea opposite the dock was completely frozen by Duque's cold air. Rapid avalanche? No, this was no longer just a simple, rapid avalanche. The ice shield on Duque's body expanded almost endlessly, and all the seawater that entered the cold shield was instantly frozen. At the same time, the ice tornado that kept spinning in the shield was like a grinder, grinding away all the ice spikes and icicles that were higher than the horizon. The crackling sound of ice shards grinding against each other could be heard continuously. As Duque walked out step by step, a huge floating ice that was getting bigger and bigger appeared in the sight of the 50,000 soldiers. It was a huge floating ice that was like an iceberg. The side of the dock was rectangular, and the floating ice near this side was at least 300 meters wide. And as Duque walked out step by step, the surface area of this huge floating ice continued to expand. From afar, it looked like an incomparably huge ice ship. What 3-masted sailboats or 5-masted sailboats? In front of this gigantic floating ice ship, they were simply too weak. Even the aircraft carrier that Duque had before he transmigrated was just a tiny dot in front of this huge ice ship. Chapter 194. Heavens, how much magic does Duque have? Even though Duque had told him earlier, Lang was still in disbelief. Beside Lang, the last Morning Star court mage heaved a long sigh. "Your Majesty, if it were me, I might only be able to support half the area." Lang, Anduin and Bolvar were visibly moved. Did this mean that Duque's magic far surpassed the standard of an average Morning Star mage? On the shore, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Looking at this huge piece of floating ice, everyone knew that this was the ark that would take them away. However, what if they stood on it for too long? Would they freeze to death? It was summer, and while it was great to play with the ice, the cold air it emitted made people cower. "Everyone move aside." Windsor was already instructing Duque's private soldiers to work. A large number of people swarmed forward, spreading the large amount of hay that had been piled on the pier onto the ice. Not only did the hay block the cold air, it also prevented people from slipping on it. Apart from the hay, there was even a fence to prevent people from slipping out. The elite soldiers of the Storm Kingdom were completely dumbfounded by what they saw. Was this even possible? Ugh, it was indeed impressive and magical. Duque walked more than 500 meters, and after extending the ice to 600 meters, he stopped. Looking at the pile of incomparably dim magical gems in his hands that had lost their magical glow, Duque could not help but laugh bitterly. If any of these high-grade magical gems were to flow out, it would attract the Dalajan's pharaoh, who were usually high and mighty, to come running over and snatch them like dogs. Any two of them could buy the loyalty of a sky mage. If the magical gems used tonight were used to bribe people, this would be the price of a Morning Star mage. Yes, Kel, Fized, who would become a great lich in the future and rely on the filthy demon king, was at this level. However, they had all been used by Duque to toy with. Duque did not feel that it was a pity. Human lives could never be measured with money. Leaving behind 50,000 elites was enough to have a major impact on the entire situation. "Old Mai, you've worked hard to protect Stormwind all your life. Now that I've used your fortune to save so many people, you should thank me properly." Of course, Duque didn't have that much mana, but after he used up the mana gems that Medivh had left in Karazhan, he managed to accomplish this miracle. In order to prevent the ice from cracking, Duque used his unparalleled magic control to separate the ice into 3 layers. The top layer carried passengers, while the middle and lower layers were used to support the passengers. Finally stopping, Duque waved from afar and shouted, "Everyone, come up." In the hazy night, the light blue light flickered, contrasting with the blood and flames that dyed Stormwind City red, forming a very magical, very unique and strange landscape. The cold air began to condense, and the light reflected from the surface of the ice formed an illusory scene. The magical beauty of the huge ice ship made everyone forget the sense of loss of the capital for a moment, and put their minds into this surreal dream. The 50,000 troops, under the command of various commanders, walked along the dock and boarded the ice ship in an orderly manner. The air rippled with the sound of whispers. Of course, the biggest topic of discussion was how they were going to move the huge ice ship. Is Duque going to create a few giant sails out of thin air? How is he going to control it? Lang asked Anduin softly. "How would I know?" Lothar rolled his eyes. Back then, Duque had suggested using the ice ship to transport the soldiers away during the secret discussion, which sounded very noble. But in reality, when it came down to it, no one had ever studied how to move such a huge ice ship. The senior executives only knew that without the last 50,000 elite troops, they wouldn't even be able to stall for time. If Duque could save all of them, it would be a waste of time. Even if the orc army was burned to ashes, Clayan and the others thought that they would just have to make a few more trips to transport as many as they could. They agreed to Duque's plan purely because there was no better way. Out of trust in Duque, no one asked carefully about the details. Then, they ushered in the moment of a miracle. Duque took out a peculiar conch that was engraved with runes and blew into it. More than 10 seconds later, thousands of bubbles appeared on the surface of the sea. A group of something was emerging from the bottom of the sea. Even though everyone was mentally prepared, they were relieved when they saw the hilarious and huge eyeballs. Murlocs. Thousands of murlocs. They floated up from the bottom of the sea in a disorderly manner. Some places were simply crowded with murlocs, and there was no fear of falling into the sea at all. Some places were tens of square meters, and there was not a single murloc. The Naga arrived. The burly male Naga carried large bundles of ropes on his shoulders and quickly climbed onto the ice. The ropes were tied with sharp grappling hooks. The male Naga chiseled these grappling hooks down and fixed them on the ice. At this time, the Naga priestess, Vara, came. She still crossed her 4 crystal arms and bowed, but this time her head was lower. Great Master, Vara Ferlin Elvis is at your command. Duque waved his hand. Let's go. The male Naga held a giant hammer and smashed it hard at the connection between the dock and the ice ship. Not long after, there was a loud clatter, and the last connection between the ice ship and the land was separated. Vara's 2 right arms pointed to the dark distance and made a sharp and majestic voice. Jalalalajuo, you lowly murlocs, for the great lord of the ocean, get more people, pull the ship. Like a tug of war, nearly 100 murlocs pulled a rope and pulled with all their might. Thousands of splashes suddenly rose on the surface of the sea. At first, it was very slow, but it finally began to feel like it was moving. In the distance, in the darkness of the night, the blurry mountains and the torch-like Stormwind City seemed to have moved. Everyone knew that it was not Stormwind City or Stormwind Port that moved, but the ice ship under their feet. The soldiers, who were still in shock, finally reacted. Woo woo woo! The veterans cried. Some of them had lived in Stormwind City since they were born. Not only them, but their fathers, grandfathers, and many generations of ancestors had all lived in Stormwind City. Now, even if it was a glorious retreat, they still could not suppress the disappointment in their hearts. Before, their lives were uncertain, but now that they were finally sure that they were safe, they finally did not need to control their feelings. Woo woo woo, wails sounded in the team. Under the siege of hundreds of thousands of ferocious orcs that could fight 10 against 1, heavily injuring the enemy and then retreating. This was a myth for the soldiers of Stormwind City, but for the militia, garrison, and even civilians who were not soldiers not long ago, it was a fairy tale, a magical fairy tale. Chapter 195. On the surface of the ice, a loud and clear song echoed. With the glory of Thoradin the Great, we rushed to the south and planted the blue lion flag on the King's Valley, that is the symbol of humanity's great legacy. We put our fate in your hands, the golden lion flag. Ah, the golden lion, you are the symbol of dignity and nobility, you are the knight that symbolizes honor. Ah, Stormwind City, you are the fortress of pioneers, the bridgehead of humanity's civilization. No matter what enemy it is, you can defeat it. This song was originally an unknown tune from 1,000 years ago, but unknowingly, it became one of the military songs of Stormwind, and would be played during every break of military training. But now that it was sung by the warriors who had lost their country, there was an additional sense of sorrow and sorrow. To every warrior of Stormwind, only when they had truly taken back Stormwind City and reclaimed the Elven Forest would they be worthy of this military song. After more than half a year of suffering, the journey was full of bitterness. The warriors of Stormwind used their blood and tears to water every inch of land from the Red Ridge Mountains to the Elven Forest, and then to Stormwind City. Some lost their houses and fields, some lost their best friends of many years, some lost their wives and children, and what was worse was that they had lost their own capital. From now on, they were just stray dogs in the eyes of others. But no matter how strong the orcs were, they were not depressed. Because they had a great King Lang who had accompanied them until the very end. They had a great commander, Andoin, who was always encouraging them and leading them. They also had a great hero who had mysterious abilities and created one miracle after another, Duque. Tonight, all the suffering had temporarily come to an end. From the next dawn, they firmly believed that under the leadership of these heroes, they would finally win the war against the orcs. Sir Marcus, thank you. You are our benefactor, our hope. Thank you, I can finally live to see my wife and children. As Stormwind City disappeared into the horizon, the soldiers began to shout excitedly after surviving a disaster. The further away they were from Stormwind City, the more intense the flames were. If the sound at the beginning was just a trickle of spring water in the dense forest, Then by the end, it had become a surging ocean. The sound waves were like huge waves set off by a hurricane, assaulting one's face. Duque, Lang, Bolvar, and the other higher-ups of the storm stood side by side at the front of the ice ship. It was at this moment that they truly understood what it meant to be a tsunami. When 50,000 people crowded together and raised their swords to cheer and salute, the shocking scene was definitely unforgettable. It was not a military parade, nor was it an act on the scene, but a sincere expression of gratitude. King Lang smiled. Duque, make a platform for the soldiers to see you. Duque was a little embarrassed. He was in the limelight, wasn't he? Your Majesty, this? Lang smiled as he patted the huge block of ice that had frozen Blackhand's head. He then looked at the huge tribal flag and said, "These two things are enough for me. Besides, I've never cared about the reputation of a true hero being above mine. You see, I've never been the most famous person in the military." Lang was incomparably magnanimous. Anduin also egged Duque on. "Young man, Lang is preparing to make you do hard labor. If you don't go collect some interest first, I'm afraid you'll be miserable for a long time." Bolvar also smiled and nodded at Duque. Duque no longer hesitated. A huge ice prism beneath his feet lifted Duque straight up. Seeing Duque's robed figure, a huge wave of cheers rose into the sky. All of a sudden, the dark clouds dispersed, and the tranquil moonlight shone on the surface of the ice. It was as if the moon had heard the cheers and sneakily poked its head out to take a look. Long live Duke Marcus. Long live the great guardian of the storm. It was no exaggeration to say that Duque's blood was boiling at this moment. He suddenly felt that all the hard work and preparation he had put in for so long was all worth it. At this moment, the system notification sounded. "Congratulations, host. Your reputation in Stormwind has been permanently fixed at worship. Even if you lose all your integrity in the future, the people of Stormwind will still believe you unconditionally. In that case, your integrity will be seen as a hypocritical state." Hypocritical state? What the hell was that? Duque did not have time to think too much. He came down after receiving 3 waves of cheers from the soldiers. Anduin then asked, "What do we do next? Your merfolk are going to drag us to South Shore just like that?" Duque could not help but laugh. "How is that possible? It's not easy to maintain this big ice ship, and the waves in the deep sea will be a problem. It's summer now, and the high temperature will easily melt the ice." Bolvar's expression turned a little ugly. "Damn it, we have almost no food and water. If the ice melts, won't it?" Bolvar had already imagined the tragic scene of a group of people wearing armor and sinking straight into the sea. Duque took out a simple sea map and pointed to an island opposite Stormwind City. "Our destination is here." The ice ship arrived at its destination early the next morning. It was a small island that was only 5 square kilometers in size. The biggest feature of the island was that it had a fresh water spring. The sea merchants who traveled between Stormwind City and Kol Tiras all knew of this nameless island. When there was a shortage of drinking water, most would choose to stop here to replenish their water. And now, there was enough bread to feed 50,000 people for half a month. The soldiers once again burst into fiery cheers when they stepped on land. Duque shrugged. "All right, the next step is to wait for the fleet to send us to South Shore." Under the shade of a few trees, the higher-ups of Stormwind began to discuss the future policies of the kingdom. "I plan to make a trip to Rotterdam. I want to unite all the human kingdoms, as well as the dwarves and high elves, to form a huge alliance to fight against the orcs' invasion." Cleon revealed the plan that he had been thinking about for a long time. Rotterdam was located in the northeast of the Eastern Kingdom. It was the home that the Rotterdam Kingdom was most proud of. In fact, at this point in time, the Rotterdam Kingdom was the most powerful among the 7 human kingdoms. The rich Rotterdam Kingdom had the widest fields and the largest population among the 7 kingdoms. There was a saying that went, "I'd rather be a baron in Rotterdam than an earl in Torrential Fortress." This mentality was a good reflection of the richness of the land. "Should I stay in South Shore to train the troops?" Anduin asked. "No, you should follow His Majesty to Rotterdam." Duque rejected Lothar's suggestion. Chapter 196. Why? Lothar was puzzled. In his opinion, as the highest military commander of the kingdom, he should be with his soldiers. The 7 kingdoms need a reason to work together. Duke's answer enlightened everyone. Yes, the Arather Empire. Being of the same race, of the same origin, and of the same clan, especially in front of a great enemy, was the best reason to unite. Moreover, there was no deep hatred between the 7 kingdoms. Abandoning the son of Thoradin the Great was indeed unkind, but they did not fight against each other. Hence, Lothar's identity as Thoradin's son was very important. Your Majesty, It was difficult for Anduin to deal with such a sensitive issue. Don't worry. After all, it was your ancestor who gave up the throne to my ancestor. In the eyes of outsiders, there was indeed a suspicion of usurpation. However, when it came to matters that concerned all of humanity, and even the world of Azeroth, such trifles were nothing. The training of the troops can be left to Bolvar. Anduin thought for a while and nodded. At the end of the day, Lang, Anduin, and Bolvar were all very upright people. Without the restriction of those annoying nobles, they could exert their full strength. Bolvar, I'll leave the training of the troops, my queen, and Varian to you. Lang did not have many capable subordinates. Some of the nobles who were originally in high positions had either become demons or been slaughtered by the demons in the middle of the sea. This was almost equivalent to the position of an assistant minister, and was definitely the highest of the highest. As you wish, Your Majesty. Bolvar bowed deeply. Lang turned to look at Duke. He took a deep breath, and with a wave of his hand, a servant handed him a small spoon of melted wax. Another servant handed him a document, opened it, and poured the wax on it. Then, Lang took out the royal seal from his arms and stamped it heavily on the wax. This is... Duke glanced at it and saw his own name. King Lang turned his head and smiled at Duke. Duke Marcus, please kneel. Yes. Fine, the boss had given me an empty promise, so I'll just kneel then. Duke Marcus, in order to thank you for your great achievements, as well as to commend your loyalty, bravery, and wisdom, I now confer you the title of Duke of Stormwind. You are allowed to have twice the private army of a normal duke. Your fief consists of the following: East Vale Lumberyard in the north, Karazhan in the south, Mistmantle Manor in the west, and Triangle Junction in the east. I know that there are many places that have fallen to the orcs, but I believe that one day, we, the Stormwind, will reclaim this beautiful and fertile land. He thought it was over, but who knew it wasn't? You will be the commander-in-chief of the Stormwind Navy. You will be in charge of all naval ships, and you will be allowed to recruit no more than 1/5 of the Navy's total forces. Duque was visibly moved. The private armies of the nobles in Stormwind were strictly limited by class. Dukes were not allowed to have more than 5,000 men. Twice that was 10,000. This was a legal military force that could be put on the table. As for the fief, no one knew better than Duque how powerful Stormwind was later in the history. Because the other human kingdoms had either fallen or declined, Stormwind City had become the greatest benchmark for the human race. Stormwind absorbed a large number of refugees from the north, and the speed at which its soldiers grew was even more exaggerated than the undead scourge. Indeed, the Headwind Trail had been blown to smithereens by Mediva's big explosion, but East Vale Lumberyard and other rich lands in Elven Forest were definitely first-class fiefs. And as the commander-in-chief of the Navy, there was no doubt that the whole of Stormwind and the benefits derived from the sea were all given to Duque. Everyone knew that now that Stormwind had almost completely fallen, and it was only a matter of time before the western wilderness was completely destroyed, if Stormwind wanted to continue, it had to rely on Duque. However, it was rare for someone like Clayan to have such boldness. Without hesitation, Duque bowed his head. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your gift. Lang smiled and finally sighed. What gift? If it wasn't for you, even if Stormwind was not completely destroyed, I'm afraid only tens of thousands of people would have escaped. Maybe even I would have died in Stormwind. I'm the one who feels guilty for making these empty promises. Your Majesty, you've done very well, Anduin and the other officials comforted Lang. Sigh, The resettlement of nearly 600,000 soldiers is a headache just thinking about it. But we don't have anything. If that doesn't work, try to ask other countries to take in our people. Right? No money. No food. How could they survive? Anduin and the others looked at each other, dumbfounded. In times of crisis, they only thought about saving people's lives and saving them first. Now that they had saved them, they were dumbfounded. They had to eat, drink, and go to the toilet. If it was only tens of thousands of people, they might be able to beg the other countries. But there were 600,000 people here. Just the thought of it was terrifying. Yet, when he escaped, he didn't bring anything with him other than his weapons. Not to mention that Duke Ferens, who was in charge of internal affairs, was dead. Even if he was not dead, he would probably be scared to death on the spot. Duque, can I trouble you to go to Alterac Rapids Castle and the Dalajan to negotiate with the heads of the countries? Also, our national treasury is finished. I wonder if you can lend a sum of money to the kingdom in your own name. Lang's face was flushed when he said this. On one hand, he really did not have any talented people around him. Bolvar and the others were indeed righteous knights, but they were definitely not good at diplomacy. Moreover, if they were to go begging like beggars, it would be strange if the other side would have a good expression. On the other hand, a dignified king actually had to borrow money from a duke. What face did he have? And the richest person here was Duque. Your Majesty, please do not worry about the national treasury. With that, Duque snapped his fingers, and two burly male Nagas carried a huge box out of the sea. The royal guards took the box and opened it. A burst of golden light almost blinded Lang and the other poor people's eyes. Gold bars. So many gold bars. These gold bars were engraved with the emblem of a lion. It was no doubt the gold bars used in Stormwind. These are... Lang stuttered. Your Majesty, have you forgotten? A while ago, when those nobles were escaping, they encountered the Bloodsail pirates. In order to escape, their ship turned and left behind a large amount of their belongings. Then my Murlocs picked them up. Lang suddenly remembered that because those nobles had colluded with the demons, they had been demoted. According to the kingdom's laws, their fiefs and properties would be confiscated. At this moment, Anduin, Bolvar, and the royal guards all bowed to Duque. Duke Marcus, you have a heart that shines with a holy light. Chapter 197. Honesty, courage, wisdom, and loyalty, Duque had become a synonym for a saint in everyone's hearts. In reality, other than his smarts as a transmigrator, Duque's other three qualities were all **T. Duque had never thought that he had ever been loyal to Lang. As a modern man, deep in his bones, he was a boss and a worker. Duke would never be touched by the feeling of sacrificing his life for the other party. As a transmigrator who was familiar with history, Duque knew that money was not enough, but having too much money was useless. The most important thing was still power. His own power and the power of his subordinates. According to history, the First Orc War ended with the opening of the Dark Portal and the fall of Stormwind City. Then, the Orc army regrouped and headed north, looking for trouble with all the races and kingdoms on the continent. This was the start of the Second Orc War. Duque did not know if the Orcs would continue to go against all the races and factions on the continent like they did in history. Obviously, when Duque saw that the world of Azeroth's similarity had dropped from 80% to 79%, Duque realized that history would continue to be shockingly similar. Duke had saved 50,000 elite soldiers, as well as Leon, who hadn't died in history. Of course, Khadgar had died as well. He had killed over 100,000 Beastman elite soldiers and had even ruthlessly tricked Orgrim. Even with so much fate deviation, he had only managed to reduce the similarity by 1%. Just thinking about it made one drunk. However, when he thought about the mighty Burning Legion and the Creation Titans that would appear later on, he suddenly felt that it was quite amazing that he had done so much in exchange for 1% of the world's change. Alright, back to reality. At noon on the second day, the first batch of ships arrived. This batch of ships had more than enough space. After replenishing some daily necessities and medicine for the people waiting on the island, they carried a total of 16,000 people. On the ship, Duque was already busy. Because the tribe did not pay much attention to the western wilderness, Duque was able to secretly transport the summer grain that had not yet been sent to Stormwind City to South Shore. This batch of grain could greatly alleviate the food shortage in South Shore. In addition, there was the migration of the Murlocs and Nagas. In fact, the orcs couldn't do anything to the Murlocs on the coast, but Duque needed the Murlocs more, South Shore. The entire continent of the Eastern Kingdom was actually divided into two continents, the North and the South, connected by a gigantic solder bridge. To the south of the southern continent was the territory of Stormwind, while to the north of the southern continent was the territory of the dwarves centered around Ironforge. To the southeast of the northern continent was the Arthi Highlands, which was where the Stromgarde Kingdom was located. To the south was the Hillsbrad Hills, the territory of the weakest of the 7 human kingdoms, the Alterac Kingdom. The place where the refugees of Stormwind City were evacuated was South Shore, which was located south of the Hillsbrad Hills by the sea. To the west of the northern continent was the Magic Kingdom of Dalagen, and to the north was the most powerful Lordaeron Kingdom. Of course, the northernmost part of the northern continent was the High Elves' Kuel Salis Kingdom. Now, Duque was moving the Murlocs because Duque needed the Murlocs to help reclaim the Murlocs there, and to fish as much as possible to provide fish for the Stormwind refugees. About 50,000 of the Stormwind refugees were taken in by the maritime kingdom of Kull, Tiras, while 100,000 continued to move in the direction of Stromgarde, Alterac, Dalagen, and even Lordaeron. Including the 50,000 soldiers who were about to arrive, there were less than 450,000 people left in South Shore. Even so, it was a very heavy burden. Through the system ELF, Duque had already calculated that even if they found enough land to cultivate, they would still be short of at least 20,000 tons of food before the first harvest next year. In this era, it was almost an astronomical figure. It completely exceeded the amount of food that could be bought in the commercial market. Lang was running away from reality and threw the food problem onto Duque's head. This made Duque's teeth hurt. He had a lot of things to do, such as finding time to go to the southernmost Stranglethorn Valley of the Eastern Kingdom to deal with the remaining Bloodsail pirates. Or finding time to practice magic. After much consideration, Duque decided to pay a visit to the Berev family in Alterac. Many people might wonder why Duque didn't visit the king of Alterac Kingdom, but the Berev family instead. It had to start from the history of the Alterac Kingdom. The Alterac Kingdom had a long history, but the current royal family's history was very short. It only lasted for the past 20 years. The first king of Alterac was born into a wealthy family, and in order to have a place of his own, he founded the Alterac Kingdom. He chose to build his kingdom on the steep Alterac mountain range. The land was barren, and the living conditions were terrible. Very few people were willing to follow him, and the kingdom's territory and power were very small. It was not an exaggeration to say that Alterac Kingdom was the weakest of the 7 human kingdoms. The current king, Aiden Pirinold, inherited this mess, and the situation only improved after the Berev family joined in. The Berev family of the Alterac Kingdom was a wealthy family that controlled a large amount of land east of the Alterac mountain range. Brill, Terran Mill, Caer Darrow, South Shore. These places were all their fiefdoms. Their wealth surpassed that of the Alterac royal family. They had Arthi blood, and the family lived in Caer Darrow County, which was an old castle of the Arthi people. They continued this ancient and noble family bloodline. In fact, the Berev family was the one that Duque had been dealing with. From the very beginning, Duque had never set his sights on the other factions to get the food. The transportation of food in this era was terrible. Even the slightest bit of distance would result in a 50% loss of food. The only thing that Duque felt lucky about was that most families had the habit of storing food because the harvest was not stable. As long as he could settle the rich Berev family, he would not have to worry about food until next year. A week later, Lang and Duque's group arrived at South Shore. Ryan was very surprised by the expanded South Shore. There was a stone pier built according to the standards of Stormwind City, and there were neat wooden houses as far as the eye could see from the entrance of South Shore. There were medical, food, fire protection, toilets, and all kinds of living facilities available. There was even a huge wooden wall being built. But after comforting the people, Lang hurried on the road to Lordaeron. Duque left Windsor to help him train his private army while he brought Makarov and the others to Cair Darrow County to meet Alex Barov, Aiden's best friend, and now Duke Barov. Chapter 198. Just as Duque arrived at South Shore and was about to visit the Barov family, something huge happened in the tribe. Judgment. Traitor. Orgrim. You disgrace to the beastmen. Hey wolf. Hey wolf. Hey wolf. The clamor filled the entire camp. Every tribal warrior's eyes were bloodshot because of anger. Their necks seemed to be stuffed with two dicks, thick and red. They opened their mouths full of fangs and roared at the top of their lungs. At the center of the hall was Orgrim, who was kneeling on both knees. He was once the assistant of the great chief, but now he was a traitor in the eyes of the beastmen. The horn that was used to summon the great chief was still sounding. It sounded as though it was mourning the death of the great chief, but it also seemed like it was trying to awaken the anger in the beastmen's hearts. Countless pebbles of all sizes were thrown at Orgrim, who was kneeling on the ground. These stones were the size of a human fist, and when they hit Orgrim's face, they were not fatal, but they were painful. However, the physical pain could not surpass the pain in his heart. It was the pain of losing 100,000 elites. It was the pain of the unknown fate of the beastmen. It was the pain of knowing that Ghoul Dan would lead the beastmen to destruction once he returned. Orgrim's mind was still replaying the scene of that day. His good friend Durotan's smile was still echoing in his mind. That day, Durotan came. He told the Hammer of Destruction everything he knew, the contract with the Demon Lord, the origin of Ghoul Dan's power, and the betrayal of the clans under the control of the Shadow Council. The final and humiliating end that awaited the beastmen was that they would be thrown as bait to the demons of the Burning Legion. As Orgrim listened, he tried his best to keep his wide face cold, making his aura and posture befitting of the assistant of the great chief. However, in his thick chest, his heart was beating violently, as though his famous Hammer of Destruction was beating on human flesh. Was this true? This sounded like a story spouted by an idiot who went through the dark portal and was messed up by the unknown energy in the void. Demons? Dark contract? What a joke! However, this was what Durotan had said. Durotan was not only the smartest, bravest, and most honorable chief of the tribe. He was also an old friend that Orgrim had trusted with his life more than once, and he had repaid Orgrim's trust with his greatness, courage, and integrity more than once. If these words were spoken by any other orc, Orgrim would definitely teach them a lesson with his hammer. If the one who said this was Durotan, then Orgrim's answer would be trustworthy. In the following days, Durotan paid the price for his integrity and loyalty to the tribe with his life. He and his wife, Draka, had been assassinated by the Shadow Council. Whenever he recalled this scene, Orgrim's steady hands would tremble uncontrollably. Orgrim couldn't help but ask himself, am I going to die? Should I die in such a cowardly manner as a traitor? No, there's a lot I haven't done yet. If I die like this, then no one will be able to control Ghoul Dan. This true traitor will lead the entire tribe into the abyss of death and shamelessly sell the souls of all orcs to the demons. Thinking of this, Orgrim suddenly let out an earth-shattering roar. Not traitor. Orgrim's voice was so loud that it was like a clap of thunder. It actually suppressed the clamor of the thousands of orcs present. Every orc's face froze. Their roars were suppressed into their throats, unable to come out. If you're not a traitor, then who is? A deep voice rang out. This voice had an inhuman coldness to it, as though the owner of this voice was temperamental. Kilrog Deadeye, the chief of the Bloodloop tribe. Due to the unexpected death of the chief, he had no choice but to temporarily hand over the army to his deputy and lead his personal guards back. With the Blackrock tribe suffering heavy losses, the authority of the Bloodloop tribe had undoubtedly increased. Among the chiefs of the dozens of tribes present, his authority could be ranked in the top 3. Orgrim stood up proudly and fearlessly looked Kilrog's remaining eye in the eye. For a moment, Orgrim's words were on the tip of his tongue. He almost said, Ghoul Dan is a traitor. But at this moment, Duque's face, which always had a mysterious smile on it, appeared in Orgrim's mind. Duke Marcus, the most powerful human mage, the most cunning strategist. He was the one who orchestrated all of this. He was the one who put the 100,000 orcs to death. He was the one who killed the chief. If not for him, perhaps the orcs would have had to put in more effort, but they definitely wouldn't have won such a Pyrrhic victory. Orgrim also had an even clearer understanding. The only person who could deal with the existence of the mystical realm was Gul'dan, who was also a mystical. Whether it was him or the other chiefs, they couldn't do anything to Duque. Thinking of this, Orgrim forcefully swallowed his words and instead let out a maniacal laugh. Ha ha, ha. Kilrogg, you make me feel like a joke? Why do you think I'm a traitor who killed 100,000 of my own people for the sake of the humans? Why would you rather believe the lies of the humans than the loyalty of a orc? Why would you believe a despicable mage who set fire to us orcs again and again? Orgrim's rebuttal stunned the chieftains and the thousands of leaders around him. Orgrim's direct accusation that the arsonist was Duque was not wrong at all. Grom Hellscream roared as he strode forward. Then how do you explain the fact that more than one orc who survived in the area testified that the chief called you a traitor before he died? Also, why would your people attack the chief's personal guards? Don't you think that suddenly going crazy and attacking your own people is very familiar? It had to be said that Orgrim had the talent to win the Best Actor award. Yes, this scene was very familiar. It was the scene where the orc warlock used the art of fear on the human soldiers. You said Gul'dan betrayed us. Grom frowned. I didn't say that. But you might have noticed that the humans' tactics and equipment have been improving. So it's not impossible for them to obtain the power of a warlock. The orc chiefs fell into deep thought. At this time, Kilrogg Deadeye stood in front of Orgrim again. That tells me that you shouldn't die here as a traitor. I also know that you are one of the wisest orc warriors, and you also have the ambition to become the chief. I can give you a chance to prove yourself, as long as you join Bagash. Orgrim's heart beat violently, almost jumping out of his chest. Chapter 199. Even Duque didn't know that because he had tricked Orgrim, it had caused Orgrim to invoke a ritual that had never appeared in any history, Bagrash. This was a ritual for orcs who were suspected of being traitors to prove their reputation. The ritual was very simple, violent, and bloody. That was, under the witness of at least 100 orc warriors, 7 recognized warriors would stab 7 daggers into the body of the ritual participant. The daggers couldn't cause fatal wounds, they couldn't injure the tendons or bones, and they couldn't injure the internal organs. Then, the participant would have to fight a duel to the death with a recognized warrior, usually a tribe chief, while having 7 daggers stabbed into their body. Only by winning the duel would the participant be considered to be cleared of suspicion and their reputation restored. No one knew why Kilrogg would suggest letting Orgrim participate in Bagrash. If one had to force a reason on Kilrogg, it would be his dead eye that could no longer see. Kilrogg was born into the Bloodring clan of Draenor. When his clan was about to be exterminated by the Crowmen, Kilrogg unwillingly bowed his head and admitted defeat. Under the arrangements of his sickly father, he followed the clan's ancient tradition. He found the hidden chamber that was named after his clan and carried out the terrifying ritual of sacrificing his left eye in exchange for seeing his future. In the ritual, Kilrogg foresaw that his death was still far away, so he knew that he would survive this disaster. Encouraged by his destiny, he seized control of the clan and led the Bloodring clan to crush the threat of the Crowmen. Then he won countless battles. In the following years, he slaughtered any dissidents, and even his closest kin couldn't escape the death penalty. He had always hoped that his destiny would come to him step by step. Although orcs were rude and unreasonable, most of them were superstitious. In the current situation where there were no shamans in the tribe's camp, Kilrogg's Deadeye became quite convincing. Without hesitation, Grom Hellscream, Samuro, and the other high-ranking warriors all agreed to Kilrogg's proposal. Orgrim Doomhammer, are you going to accept Bagrash in order to prove your innocence? Gilrog's voice was cold, but it also carried a kind of sharp pressure. It was a terrifying aura that only a warrior who had walked out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood would have. He was old, but no one could deny that he was still one of the strongest warriors in the tribe. I accept. Orgrim stood under the doubtful gazes of countless orcs. Not only do I accept it, but I also request that when you accept Bagash, you also activate Makra. Hiss. Countless orcs sucked in a breath of cold air. This meant that Orgrim had to accept challenges from at least 7 chieftain-level warriors while being stabbed 7 times. He could only stop when there were no more challengers. Of course, if Orgrim succeeded, he would become the second great chief of the Horde after Blackhand. Every orc's broad face was filled with unconcealable shock. Either Orgrim was a madman, or he would become the strongest warrior in the history of the Horde. Come! Orgrim suddenly hammered his chest, creating a loud bang. Gil-Rog didn't say a word. He pulled out a long, curved bone dagger. This bone dagger was at least 30 centimeters long. A white light flashed, and the entire dagger was stabbed diagonally into Orgrim's left collarbone. It pierced through Orgrim's muscles that were as thick as city walls, and came out from the back of his left shoulder blade. Blood splattered everywhere. It was a ghastly sight. Phew! Orgrim didn't even groan in pain. He merely clenched his fists. Gromhel roared and charged forward. His face was expressionless as he pierced through Orgrim's right arm with his dagger, only avoiding the tendons and bones. Orgrim let out a low groan. Swordmaster Samuro of the Fireblade clan followed behind and pierced Orgrim's right thigh with his dagger. Then the 4th, 5th, and 7th warrior went up. Every one of them left a dagger on Orgrim's body. At this moment, Orgrim had become a hedgehog covered in blood. Who is willing to use Orgrim Doomhammer's life to prove their bravery? Who is willing to obtain this Doomhammer, fair and square? Orgrim's roar was as loud as a bell, and it reverberated in all directions. Not many beastmen would be willing to kill a beastman who might be dishonorable unless they could obtain real benefits from him. Coincidentally, Orgrim had it. Not many beastmen could resist the temptation of Doomhammer, especially after Orgrim used it to kill no less than 500 warriors of various races. Ogres, giant lizards, land dragons, and human army commanders. Orgrim used his illustrious battle records to indirectly prove the power of this hammer. Suddenly, a flag was thrown into the middle of the field. I, Galil of the Shattered Sand clan, stake my honor to fight you. Looking at this opponent who was more than a head taller than him, Orgrim was a little disappointed. This was the chief of a small clan with only a few hundred people, but as a suspected traitor, he really couldn't ask for more. In the sky, rolling clouds surged. On the ground, a horn sounded. Whether it was Makra or Bagash, nothing could attract the attention of the beastmen more than the bloodiest and most passionate battle. Only those who dared to face death would be recognized by the beastmen who valued martial arts. Only this most primitive and most unsophisticated battle could truly wash away Orgrim's suspicions. Come! Orgrim roared, and the little chief, Galil, rushed over. Bang! Bang! Galil's heavy footsteps could be heard on the solid ground. Galil's momentum gave people the illusion that a mountain was collapsing. Die-dash, Galil bared his teeth and slashed with his huge machete. It was powerful enough to cut Orgrim in half with one slash. But Orgrim's sharp eyes flashed with a hint of disappointment again. Whether it was strength, speed, or skill, they all disappointed Orgrim. For some reason, he thought of Andoin Lothar, the human who had killed Blackhand the other day. He was clearly at a disadvantage in terms of speed and strength, but Lothar used his perfect unloading techniques and amazing footwork to fight evenly with the great chieftain. Looking at such an opponent, Orgrim didn't even want to wait a second longer. In the eyes of outsiders, he accidentally dropped the heavy hammer of destruction. Only those who knew the ropes could see that he didn't take Galil seriously at all. Just at the moment when the machete was about to fall, Orgrim suddenly exerted force with his intact left leg and rushed into Galil's arms. He punched the enemy's wrist that was holding the machete. The next second, he suddenly clapped his hands. Galen's entire head was instantly smashed in the palm of his hand. It was like a watermelon smashed by a hammer. Orgrim looked up to the sky and shouted, "Next!" You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.